The birds went silent before Aldrich heard the men. He had been running the deer paths since noon, checking the snares his father set along the ridge where the pines grew thin, and it was the hush that stopped him. The way the whole living green of the hollow reaches drew its breath and held it. No jay quarreled, no thrush turned the leaf mould. Only the far white rush of the sable fall, and under it, faint as a splinter working loose, the sound of boots that did not care who heard them. Bounty men. His father had a word for the way they walked. Owners, he called them. Men who moved through a wood as if it were a haul they had already bought. Aldrich dropped the string of snares and ran. He was 18 and had run these slopes his whole life, and still the fear made his feet clumsy on the roots. Branches raked him. A low bough opened his cheek, and he did not slow. The camp was 3 ridges over, tucked in the throat of a dry gully where the smoke would not carry, and he knew every fold of ground between here and there, and it was not enough. It was never going to be enough, because he could hear now that there were many of them, and they were spread wide, a net drawn slow through the trees, and he was inside it. He came down the last slope in a controlled fall and burst through the screen of young firs into the camp, shouting before he had breath to shout with. "Father! Hunters! They're in the wood!" Berthold Vian was already standing. That was the thing Aldrich would carry afterward, through everything that came, that his father had known before he arrived. The old man stood beside the cold fire with the longsword bare in his crippled hand, its pierced blade catching what little light fell through the canopy, and his ruined leg braced under him the way it braced when he meant not to move again. He had been listening to the wood, the same as his son. He had simply had longer to understand what the silence meant. "How many?" Berthold said. Not a question, quite. "I don't know. 6? More? They're spread out, they're driving." Aldrich's voice cracked. "They're driving toward the river." Something moved behind his father's eyes, quick and cold. A man doing sums he had done many times before and hated the answer to. "Toward the falls," he said softly. "Clever. They've a tracker who knows the ground." He looked at Aldrich then, truly looked, and for a moment the hardness went out of his face and left only the tiredness under it. The deep exhaustion of a man who had been waiting years for a footstep in the dark and was almost relieved that it had finally come. "Get your pack," Berthold said. "The one by the lean-to. It's ready." "What?" "It has been ready for 3 years, Aldrich. Get it." Aldrich did not move. Understanding was arriving in him the way cold water arrives, from the feet up. "You packed a bag for me." "You knew they would." "I hoped they wouldn't." His father was strapping on the old boiled leather cuirass now, one-handed, fast, his crippled leg not permitting him to bend for the buckles, so that he simply left the lower ones and let the plate hang. "I hoped I'd die of the leg first, or the cough, and you'd be vowed by then, and gone to Bleak Hollow with a name that wasn't ours, and none of this would ever find you. Hope's a poor smith, boy. It never made a thing that held." He jerked his chin. "The pack." Aldrich got the pack. His hands did it while the rest of him stood apart and watched. Inside, he already knew, would be trail bread and a fire striker and a coil of good rope and the little kit of copper needles and glass slivers his father used for his craft, and a folded square of oiled cloth and coin, and everything a man might need who was never coming home. It weighed almost nothing. That was the worst of it. His whole life, made light enough to run with. "Listen to me now," Berthold said, and took him by the back of the neck the way he had when Aldrich was small and would not attend, and pressed their foreheads together so that Aldrich could smell the wood smoke and old sweat, and the sharp mineral tang of the glass dust that never fully left his father's skin. They are not here for you. They are here for what I carry. The full weave, the Vern method. House Lorcow has wanted it for 40 years, and they have finally spent enough coin to buy a man who could find me. They want it out of my head, and there is only one way to take a thing out of a man's head. Do you understand what I am telling you? Then give it to them, Aldrich said, and his voice broke on it, shameful and childish and true. Give it to them and live. It's only a method, it is the only thing I have that is worth more than my life, his father said. And the second thing is standing in front of me, and I will not let them take either. His grip tightened. You will go to the river. You will not go to the river the short way, where they're driving you. You will cut north along the Deadfall to the old shepherd stones and cross there where the water spreads. And you will make for Three Hearth, and you will find the Underhalt family, and you will tell them Berthold's son has come, and they will hide you until your calling. Say it back. Father, say it back. North along the Deadfall, the shepherd stones, Three Hearth, the Underhalts. The words came out of him wooden and hateful. I won't leave you. You will, Berthold said, and slapped him. It was not hard. It was almost gentle, an open hand across the unwounded cheek, and it shocked Aldrich Silent more completely than a blow could have, because his father had never once in 18 years raised a hand to him. Berthold held his stunned face in both hands, one warm and whole, one clawed and stiff with old scar, and looked at him with an expression Aldrich had no name for, and would spend the rest of his life trying to name. I love you, his father said. You are the best thing the Vian line ever made, and no full weave in the world is worth as much as 1 hour of you. And I am so proud of you, it is a physical pain in my chest. Do you hear me? And if you stay here and die with me, then everything I have ever done was for nothing. So you will run, and you will grieve me later, and you will live to be an old man who tells his own children lies about how brave his father was. That is the only thing you can do for me now. Do it. And he shoved him. Aldrich stumbled backward into the furs, and for one heartbeat the whole world balanced on the edge of a knife. He could plant his feet. He could draw the belt knife. He could turn and stand at his father's shoulder, and they could die together in the gully, with the pines above them. And part of him wanted that so badly his teeth ached with it. It would be easier. It would hurt less than what his father was asking. His father was watching him choose. That was what decided it. He could not make Berthold watch him die. Aldrich turned and ran north into the Deadfall, and behind him he heard his father begin, unbelievably, to laugh. A great booming raven's croak of a laugh, pitched to carry, pitched to pull every hunter in the wood toward the sound of it, and then to bellow, in the old battle voice Aldrich had heard only in stories. The Vern line is here. Come and buy it if you've the coin. The man with the seamed face stepped into the gully clearing, while the last of the boys' crashing flight was still audible to the north, and he did not send anyone after it. He's running, said the archer at his shoulder, a nervy Fenwald girl who had signed on at Bleak Hollow for the pay and was beginning to understand what the pay was for. The son, he's... Let him. Vask the Seamed had a voice like a boot on gravel, and a scar that dragged the left corner of his mouth into a permanent small sneer, so that he always looked mildly, patiently amused. He was amused now. He had been hunting the Vern line for 2 years, and here at last, was the old wolf himself, standing crippled and grinning by a dead fire, with a masterwork sword in his bad hand, and the sight of him was worth more than a season's other work. The boy runs into the reaches with a bad tracker's chance of surviving the week. The father can't run at all. Which of them do you suppose the house is paying for? You can't scry him, the girl said, not a question, an accusation almost, because she had watched Vask try 3 times in as many days to find the old man with a costly glass and gotten only smoke. Neither of them. It's like they're not. The old man's a maker. He's warded himself and his blood against the eye. Vask never took his gaze off Berthold. It's a rare working. It's one of 100 reasons the house wants what's in his skull. He raised his own voice, unhurried, conversational. Berthold Vern, you know why I'm here. You give me the full weave, the whole method, the braiding of it, the way to take 10 seals and make 1. You give it to me clean, and I'll make your dying quick, and I'll never look for the boy. That's a good bargain. It's better than you'll get from the next man the house sends. There won't be a next man, Berthold said pleasantly. I mean to be the last thing you ever profit by seemed. Come and collect. Vask sighed, the sigh of a craftsman faced with a job that would take longer than the client wished to pay for. Take him alive, he told his people. The method's no good to us out of a corpse. Legs and arms. Leave the head. They came into the gully from 3 sides, 6 of them, and the crippled old maker set his back to the pine and lifted the pierced sword. And it began. It did not go the way the numbers said it should. Aldrich ran until the river caught him. He did not go north. He had meant to. Some cold clerk's part of his mind had kept the instructions and would have followed them. The deadfall, the shepherd stones, the wide crossing. But that part of him had gone under, drowned by the sound of his father's laughter, and then by the sounds that came after it. The shouting and the ring of steel, and the one high scream that was not his father's voice, and the silence that was not any voice at all. He ran without direction, ran the way an animal runs, and the wood he had known his whole life turned strange around him, because grief had rubbed the names off everything. And when he broke at last out of the trees, he was not at the shepherd's stones. He was at the lip of the gorge, above the sable fall, where the whole grey weight of the grey water poured off the world's edge into white nothing. And there was no crossing here, only the cliff and the falling water and the drop. An arrow took him through the meat of the left thigh. He did not understand it at first. He was standing at the cliff's edge with his chest heaving, and he looked down, and there was a shaft in his leg, fletched grey, buried to the barbs. And only then did the pain arrive. And only then did he understand that he had been herded. All that blind running, the wood had not been random. They had let him run. They had shaped his panic the way a dog shapes a flock, closing the easy ways, leaving open only the way toward the water. And now here he was, exactly where they wanted him, cornered against the one drop in 100 miles that no man walked away from. That's far enough, pup. The Fenwald archer stepped out of the trees a stone's throw off, another arrow already knocked, her face pale and set. 2 more hunters flanked her. Don't be stupid. Sit down and we'll bind that leg. Nobody's paying for you dead. Below Aldrich, the sable fall roared. He risked one glance down into it, and his stomach turned over. The drop was enormous, the water vanishing into mist and stone far below, and no one who went off this edge came up again. That was known. That was a fact of the reaches. Children were warned of it before they could walk. He looked at the archer. He looked at the drop. Something under the water was glowing. He almost missed it. Deep in the white churn at the base of the falls, where the plunge pool boiled, there was a light, a cold ring of pale radiance, steady in all that violence, the way a coin lies steady at the bottom of a stirred cup. He had heard his father speak of such things, in the low voice reserved for true and dangerous knowledge. Thresholds, Berthold called them. Old stone rings that opened downward, into the deeps, into the recreated places, the undergloom. A way into a country from which almost no one returned. Almost. "Don't," the archer said, reading his face, and her voice had lost its hardness. "Boy, don't. That's not a chance. That's just a different way to die." His father had bought this with his laughter and his life. He had bought Aldrich a running start and a full pack, and one impossible decision. And here it was, the decision. Standing on the edge of the world with a grey arrow in his leg. Capture, and the slow taking apart of everything he knew, or the drop, and the cold ring of light, and the country of the dead. "You will live to be an old man," his father had said, who tells his own children lies about how brave his father was. "I'm sorry," Aldrich told no one, his father, the archer, himself. And he jumped. The archer's arrow went where his chest had been. He heard her cry out, a sound almost of grief, and then he was falling, and the roar of the sable fall swallowed the world. The fall went on too long to be real. Wind tore at him. The cliff face blurred past, streaked with wet black stone. The white curtain of the falls thundered beside him close enough to touch. He had time to think, absurdly, that he had forgotten to draw breath, and he hauled one lungful of spray-thick air and clamped it down. He had time to feel the arrow in his thigh flare white as his kicking legs disturbed it. He had time, in the last of it, to feel something come awake in him that he did not have a name for, a steadying, a cold, clean readiness under the terror. Some deep, seal-worked instinct his father had never explained, and Aldrich had never known he carried. Straightening his body, tucking his chin, aiming him at the pale ring of light like a nail driven true. Then the water hit him like a wall of hammers, and the cold ring rose up to meet him, and the undergloom took him in. He woke on stone, and for a long while he did not move, because he could not tell if he was alive. He was cold and wet, and the cold and the wet were sensations, and sensations argued for life. He was in pain, the thigh, a deep grinding throb, and a sharper wrongness lower in the same leg that his body's animal wisdom told him was a break. And pain argued for life too. He lay with his cheek against gritty rock and listened to himself breathe and slowly, grudgingly, allowed that he had not died. He had gone off the sable fall, and he had not died. When at last he pushed himself up, the world tilted and steadied. He was in a cavern. Not a wet place. The stone under him was damp only where he had dripped onto it, and the great pool from which he had evidently crawled lay still and black behind him, its surface faintly luminous, the same cold, pale light that had drawn him down. No falls here, no river, only the still pool and its dim glow, and beyond it, a chamber of pale stone that went up into dark he could not measure, and 3 low mouths of tunnel leading off into deeper dark, and a silence so total it pressed on his ears. His pack was still on his back. His father's sword was still at his hip. The oiled cloth had done its work. When he opened the pack with shaking hands, the trail bread was dry, the fire striker dry, the little kit of glass slivers and copper needles dry in their fold. He sat in the pale glow of a pool at the bottom of the world and took inventory of his life's whole remaining weight. And when he was done, he put his face in his hands and wept, once hard and brief, for his father, and for the wood above, and for the boy he had been an hour ago, who had checked snares in the sun and not known that the world was ending. Then he stopped, because weeping used strength and warmth he did not have to spare, and because he could hear his father's voice in his memory, saying the thing he always said when Aldrich wept as a child: "Grief later. Live now. The dead don't hurry us. Only the living can." He looked at his leg. The arrow was gone, torn free somewhere in the falling or the water, leaving a ragged puncture that had bled and mostly stopped. The break was worse, a green stick crack in the shin bone that had not come through the skin, but sat under it, hot and wrong. He set his teeth and worked it straight, and the sound he made was not a scream, because he did not have the air for a scream. And then he splintered it with 2 straight sticks from the pack's kindling bundle and lashings of the good rope, and when it was done he sat, gasping and grey-faced, and knew that he had, at least, not lost the leg, and that this small victory had cost him nearly everything he had. His father had taught him about this place, not because Berthold had ever meant him to come here. No one meant their child to come here. But because a maker's son learned the shape of the world's dangers the way a shepherd's son learned wolves. The undergloom, the stacked country beneath the reaches, the deeps piled one below another, each one a ward, a place remade, recreated, a stolen echo of some field or city or forest of the surface world, walled in stone and lit by no honest sun. Things lived in the wards. Gloomspawn, the hostile, crawling, dark-born things, and worse, in each ward, at the place where you might climb to the next deep, or, if you were near enough the top, to the surface itself, there stood a warden, a great maid guardian, monstrous and mighty, that would not let you pass while it lived. That was the rule his father had spoken of in the low voice. There was one way and only one way out of a deep. You did not climb back the way you fell. The thresholds ran downward, never up. You went sideways, ward to ward, until you found the deep's warden, and you killed it, and its death opened the way. Kill a warden, and you rose. Fail, and you stayed, forever, until the gloomspawn or the dark or your own despair finished you. And Aldrich was uninitiated. He made himself think about it clearly, because it was the whole shape of his death or his life, and he could not afford to look away from it. He had not yet had his calling, the coming-of-age initiation that fixed a person's discipline, braided their earned seals into a great and lasting craft, and made them vowed and strong. Until a man had his calling, he was capped. The loom, the great impersonal weaving force that measured all striving and doled out its rewards, held the uninitiated to a low ceiling of power, the 20-fold cap, the old ones called it, past which no unvowed soul could climb. Aldrich had his seals, the aptitudes he had earned in 18 years of a hard frontier life, a quickness at reckoning a situation and adapting to it, a settled fighting poise, an unusual clarity of sight, a body harder than it had any right to be, feet that found their own way out of danger. Good seals, better than most boys his age. His father had seen to that. And every one of them sat under the 20-fold cap, and the wardens of the undergloom were made to kill vowed delvers in their prime. So, he thought, with a calm that surprised him, I grow past what a boy my age should be, or I die here. The loom rewarded striving. That was its whole nature. That was what his father had meant when he said adversity was the only true forge. Every gloomspawn Aldrich fought, every hurt he survived, every hard thing he did would be measured, and he would be given a little more and a little more. It would not be enough. It could not possibly be enough. But it was the only road there was, and his father had bought him the running start. And Aldrich Verne did not intend to waste it, dying quietly in the dark. He ate a mouthful of trail bread. He drank from the pool. It was cold and clean and tasted of stone and faintly of light. He cut a crutch fork from a longer branch of kindling and tested his weight on the splinted leg and found it would, barely, bear him. Then he chose the leftmost of the 3 tunnel mouths, for no reason but that a man must choose, and he went out of the entrance chamber into the deeper dark of the undergloom, alive, and resolved to stay that way. The tunnels smelled of old web before he saw any. He had been 3 days in the dark. He counted by sleeps, there being no other clock, and in 3 days he had learned the underworld's first lessons. That his cold sight, the seal his father had called true sight, drank what little glow the luminous stone gave off, and made of it a dim, grey day, so that he was never wholly blind. That there was water, seeping and pooling, and pale, blind fish in some of the pools, and low, colourless fungus that his cautious tasting proved would not kill him. That the gloom spawn came in the deep, dark hours, and that his sword and his hardness and his father's teaching could, so far, answer them. He had killed things, crawling things the size of dogs, with too many legs and mouths that worked sideways, a pale, coiling thing that dropped from a ceiling. Each kill had cost him sweat and sometimes blood, and each kill had been followed by that faint interior settling, that sense of some ledger being marked, a hair's breadth of new strength woven into him. His leg was mending faster than any leg should. That, too, was the loom, he supposed, or the strange, rich air of this place, thick with the fine, flowing power the makers called the quicken. He could almost feel it now, if he was still. A shimmer at the edge of sense, the world's breath moving through the stone. But nothing had prepared him for the nesting dark. He smelled it first, the dry mineral reek of old silk, and then his true sight showed him the tunnel ahead choked wall to wall with web, not the honest lace of a surface spider, but a grey clotted mass of it, sagging in ropes, bundled here and there into cocoons the size of a man, and in the deeper dark beyond, movement. Many small movements, the delicate, ceaseless stir of a great many legs. He should have gone back. He knew it even then. But behind him the tunnel forked into ways he had already found blind or blocked, and his food was low. And somewhere past this web-choked throat the air moved, which meant an opening, which meant a way onward. And Aldrich was learning that in the undergloom, the choice was almost never between danger and safety, but only ever between which danger. He tightened his grip on his father's sword, and he took up a fist-sized stone in his offhand, and he stepped to the edge of the web and struck his blade twice against the stone to wake them, because if he was going to fight a swarm, he would fight it here, in the narrow throat, where they could not come at him all at once. They came like a grey tide. There were dozens, hand-sized, then some far larger, low, flat, pale bodies scuttling over one another in their haste, mandibles clicking, and Aldrich set his back against the narrow stone and became, for a time, only a thing that killed. The old fighting poise took him, the seal of war stance settling his weight and his breath, and the pierced blade of Berthold's gift wove its bright killing pattern in the grey light, and the stone in his left hand cracked carapace and flung the small bodies back into the mass of their fellows. He did not think. Thinking was too slow. His seal of rapid reckoning ran ahead of thought, reading the swarm's surges, telling his feet where to be, and he trusted it and let his body do the terrible arithmetic of survival. It was not enough to be untouched. There were too many. He felt the first bite at his ankle above the boot, a hot needle sting, and then a second on his forearm, and he knew with cold certainty that these were the venomous kind, the true nesting dark, and that the venom was already in him. The world went strange. His limbs grew distant and heavy. His heart labored. The grey tide blurred and doubled, and here, at the edge of dying, the loom's cruel gift showed itself. The seal of rapid reckoning. The same quickness that read a battle turned inward and read the poison. He felt it. Felt his own blood arguing with the venom. Felt his body learning the shape of the toxin faster than any body should. Adapting, throwing up some ragged resistance breath by breath, even as more bites drove more poison in. It was agony. It was the most alive he had ever been. He stood in the throat of the nesting dark, and killed, and was bitten, and did not fall. And slowly, slowly, the grey tide thinned. Because he was faster than they were, and he did not stop, and they, in the end, did. When it was over, he was on his knees, without remembering having knelt. The tunnel throat was carpeted with pale, broken bodies. His ankle and forearm was swollen tight and hot, and his vision swam. But the venom's high tide had passed, and left him only sick and shaking, and not dead. He had not died. Again, he had not died. And in the raw, wrung-out aftermath, he felt the ledger mark itself, deeper this time than any kill before, a real settling, a genuine advance, the loom acknowledging that a boy had stood in a killing dark and outlasted it. His rapid reckoning was keener now. He could feel it, the way you feel a whetted edge without touching it. And woven new into him, faint but real, was a thing he had not had before, a resistance in the blood, a learned wariness of poison, bought with pain in the only coin the undergloom took. Adversity is the only true forge. His father had said it so many times it had gone meaningless, a thing you nodded at. Kneeling in the wreck of the nesting dark, poisoned and triumphant, Aldrich understood it at last, all the way down. This place would either kill him or make him into something the boy on the ridge could not have imagined. There was no third road. And some small, hard new part of him, some part the venom and the terror had smelted out of the softer stuff of grief, found that it was not afraid of that. Found that it was, God's help him, almost eager. He got up. He was a long time getting up. And then he went on, past the emptied nest, toward the moving air and the deeper ward beyond, changed by the near death in ways he was only beginning to feel. The ward beyond the web was a graveyard, and it was the strangest thing Aldrich had yet seen in the strange country of the deeps. He came out of the tunnel onto a slope of soft turf growing green-grey in the underworld, lit by a wan, directionless glow that came from nowhere and everywhere. And below him spread a wide, subterranean hollow that his mind kept insisting was the surface, a walled churchyard gone to gentle ruin, with leaning grave markers of pale stone and low, mossy tombs, and, impossibly, trees. Gnarled old orchard trees with dark leaves, and here and there a hanging fruit, growing from the rich turf between the graves. A wall of fitted stone ringed it. Mist lay in the low places. It was beautiful, and it was wrong. A place lifted whole from some surface churchyard and set down here in the dark and left to dream. And Aldrich understood that this was what his father had meant by a ward. A recreated place. A stolen echo. The Bone Meadow, he named it in his own mind, for the graves and the meadow turf, and the name stuck. He spent days in the Bone Meadow, and it remade him. The orchard fruit was good and did not poison him, and there was clean water in a mossy well, and for the first time since the falls he was not starving. His leg finished its unnatural mending until he could put it aside and walk clean. And there were gloomspawn here too, but weaker ones, shambling, grave-born things he could take singly, and he took them, and grew. And with the growing came the first true stirrings of something he had not expected to feel down here in the country of the dead. Not just the will to survive, but the appetite to become strong. He found the gravekeeper on the 5th day. It kept the ward's far gate, the low arched breach in the churchyard wall through which, his true sight told him, a tunnel led away and down. It was a wardling, one of the underworld's lesser guardians, and it was the largest living thing Aldrich had ever stood before. It had been, perhaps, a bear once, or the underworld's dreaming idea of a bear, but it walked upright on its hind legs like a man, and it wore across its huge shoulders a leather apron gone black with old gore, and in its clawed hands it carried a long, two-handed cleaver of pitted iron, taller than Aldrich was, and it kept the graves the way a butcher keeps a shambles. Bones hung from the orchard branches around its gate, clean picked, swaying. It watched him come with small, red eyes that held a horrible, patient intelligence, and it did not charge. It waited, hefting the cleaver, letting him understand what he was walking toward. Every sensible instinct in Aldrich said, "Turn back." It was too large. It was vowed killing size. He was one uninitiated boy with a longsword. But past the gravekeeper's gate lay onward, and behind him lay only the ward he had already emptied, and there was a harder thing than instinct working in him now. The appetite the venom dark had woken. He had beaten the nesting dark. He had beaten the fall. He looked at the huge, patient horror in the butcher's apron, and instead of only fear he felt, underneath the fear, a wild, bright, rising thing that he would later learn to call by its name, battle joy. And he thought, what if I could? He fought the gravekeeper for what felt like an hour and was probably minutes. He could not trade blows with it. The first sweep of the great cleaver would have halved him, and did, in fact, shear through a grave marker behind him when he flung himself clear, spraying stone chips. So he did not trade blows. He used the graves. He used the mist and the leaning stones and the orchard trunks and his seal of fleet step that found the escaping angle when the cleaver came down, and his rapid reckoning that read the beast's slow, terrible rhythm and told him the half-second after each blow when the thing was overcommitted and open. He darted and cut and fled and darted again, a fly worrying a bull, opening the gravekeeper in a dozen small places, none of them mortal, all of them bleeding, wearing it down as it had surely worn down every desperate delver before him. Except that Aldrich did not tire the way a man should tire, because the loom was marking his striving even now, mid-fight, feeding him a hair more strength, a hair more speed, so that he was, impossibly, a little faster at the end than at the beginning. The finish came when the gravekeeper, enraged past patience, buried its cleaver two-handed in the turf where Aldrich had been and could not, for one heartbeat, pull it free. Aldrich did not waste the heartbeat. He went in under the beast's guard, up onto a fallen tomb for the height, and drove Berthold's gift two-handed into the soft place beneath the gravekeeper's jaw and up, through the roof of its skull, with all his weight and all the loom's borrowed strength behind it. The pierced blade went into the diamond-latticed fuller. The gravekeeper convulsed and lifted him bodily off the tomb, and Aldrich hung on and drove the blade deeper. And then the huge body was falling, and he rode it down and tore his sword free as it hit the turf, and stood over it, chest heaving, drenched in its blood and his own. Alive. The ledger did not merely mark itself, it sang. Aldrich staggered as the reward came into him, a real and heady advance, more strength woven in at one stroke than a season of surface life would have given him. The loom lavishing its measure on a boy who had done a thing boys did not do. He felt taller in his own skin. He felt the 20-fold cap, still far above him, come a little nearer. And when the reward had settled, he understood, standing over the gravekeeper's corpse with the borrowed blood cooling on him, that he had done something that was not supposed to be possible. An uninitiated youth had slain a wardling. His father had spoken of wardlings the way one spoke of avalanches, forces, not foes, things vowed delvers approached in armed companies and often died to anyway. And Aldrich had killed one, alone, capped, with a sword and a lucky tomb. Among the bones at the gravekeeper's gate he found its keeping, a niche in the wall where the wardling had hoarded the spoils of the dead it guarded, and in the niche a small stoppered flask of thick red liquid that his father's kit knowledge named a mending draught, worth more than gold to a man alone in the dark, and other small treasures the loom seemed to fold directly into him as reward, a keening of his fighting seals, a new sureness. He drank a mouthful of the mending draught and felt the ache of the fight ease, and he stoppered the rest and stowed it like the treasure it was. He sat a long while at the opened gate, in the strange green dark of the bone meadow, and let the thought come that had been rising in him since the cleaver first fell. If the loom gives this much for a wardling, he thought, what would it give for a warden? It was a mad thought. Wardens were to wardlings as the gravekeeper had been to the shambling grave things. To kill a deep's warden was the labor of vowed companies at the height of their strength, and to do it uninitiated. No one had done it. It would be a feat the loom had no measure for, or rather a feat the loom kept its very greatest measure for, its rarest and most permanent accolades, the graces that clung to a soul forever after. And it was, not incidentally, the only way out of the undergloom. The two things were the same thing. To escape, he had to do the impossible, and to do the impossible was to be rewarded past all imagining. His father would have told him to be prudent, to grow slow and careful, to find the smallest warden in the least deep and creep past its edge somehow. To survive. Only survive. Hope's a poor smith, his father had said. But so, Aldrich was beginning to think, was prudence. Prudence had not saved Berthold Verne. Only striving was ever rewarded down here. Only the reckless got the great measure. He did not decide, that day, to slay a warden, but he let himself want it, fully and without flinching. And the wanting was its own kind of threshold, and he stepped through it, and there was no going back the way he had come. He was about to rise and go on when he heard, thin and high and frightened, from the direction of the entrance cavern far behind him, a cry. It was not a gloom-spawn sound. It was not a wardling sound. It was, unmistakably, the cry of something young and trapped and afraid. Aldrich took up his father's sword and the last of his mending draught and went back through the bone meadow toward the sound, expecting food, expecting an enemy, expecting anything at all, except what he found. The thing in the crevice was a badger the size of a pony, and it was weeping. Aldrich stood at the mouth of the narrow rift where the entrance cavern wall had cracked and looked down into it, and his mind refused for a moment to make sense of what his eyes and his true sight both plainly showed him. A young beast, broad and low and powerfully made, with the black and white barred face of a badger and the blunt, digging claws of one, but far too large, the size already of a full-grown boar, and clearly not yet done growing, had wedged itself into the rift, chasing, perhaps, some prey or some escape, and had jammed there, and could not go forward or back, and had been there long enough to have worn its claws bloody on the stone, and it was making, low in its chest, a sound of such pure animal despair that Aldrich felt it in his own breastbone. He knew what it was. Not the particular beast, but the kind. His father had spoken of them once, in the same low, true voice he used for thresholds and wardens. The beast-kin. The great, intelligent beasts of the deep interior, that the reclusive elder folk of the canopy held sacred, that dwelt in their own hidden warrens beyond the sundering peaks and rarely were seen. Grimox, this kind was called. The great badger beast, digger and delver, said to shape stone and grow to the size of a house and to be, in some way the surface folk did not fully grasp, people. Not clever animals, people. Of a different shape. And this one was young and lost and stuck, and it turned its barred face up toward him with eyes that were not an animal's eyes at all, dark and wet and terribly aware. And it saw the sword in his hand, and understood exactly what a hungry man in the dark did with a stuck and helpless meal. And it did not snarl or thrash. It simply looked at him, and waited, and grieved, because it knew what came next, and was too tired and too trapped to fight it. Aldrich sheathed his sword. He did it slowly, so the beast could see, and the dark, wet eyes followed the blade into the scabbard, and then came back to his face. And something changed in them. Not hope, not yet, but a flicker of confused attention, of a creature revising a certainty. "I'm not going to hurt you," Aldrich said, and his own voice startled him. He had not spoken aloud in days, and it came out cracked and strange. He crouched at the edge of the rift, keeping his hands open and visible. "Easy, easy now. You're stuck, that's all. I know that feeling." A broken laugh got out of him. "By the loom, do I know that feeling." The Grimox made a low, uncertain sound. It took him the better part of a day to free it. The rift had it pinned at the shoulders. He could not shift the stone with his hands, and did not dare try to lever it for fear of crushing the beast worse. In the end, it was the badger itself that made the way. Once it understood he meant to help. When Aldrich showed it, by mime and by pointing, where the stone was thinnest, the Grimox set its bloodied claws against that spot and dug. And Aldrich saw the second of his father's tales confirmed, because the stone gave under those claws like packed earth, crumbling away in wet handfuls, the beast reshaping the rock itself by some inborn gift, until the crevice widened enough that it could haul its great body free. It came out of the rift and stood swaying in the entrance cavern, filthy and bleeding and exhausted, nearly Aldrich's own height at the shoulder, and the two of them regarded one another across the pale lit stone, the boy who had lost everything above, and the beast child lost below. And neither of them, for a long moment, knew what came next. It was the Grimox who decided it. It took one heavy step toward Aldrich, and then another, and then it simply leaned its huge barred head against his chest, hard enough to stagger him, and let out a long, shuddering breath. And Aldrich put his arms as far around the broad neck as they would go, and held on, and felt the beast trembling, and understood that it had come through a threshold too, had fallen out of its own green world into this dark the same as he had been alone in it the same as he had, and was the same as he had been, done being alone. "You came through the water," Aldrich murmured into the coarse fur. "Same as me." Fell out of the whole world into the dark. He drew back and looked into the dark, wise eyes. "Well, you're not stuck anymore, and I'm not." His voice caught, and he let it, because there was no one down here to be ashamed before but this beast who had wept in a crack in the stone. "I'm not by myself anymore. That's something. That's the first good thing that's happened since." He did not finish it. He shared his trail bread with the Grimmox, who ate it delicately from his palm despite the great crushing jaws, and he washed the blood from its worn claws at the luminous pool. And by the time they had done these small tending things, a thing had grown between them that both of them recognized, and neither had a word for. When Aldrich sat with his back against the cavern wall, the Grimmox lay down against him, a warm and enormous weight, and Aldrich felt the animal's slow heartbeat through his own ribs. And for the first time since he had gone off the sable fall, he slept without dreaming of the gully. In the morning, there were no mornings, but he thought of it as morning, he found the beast watching him with those grave, attentive eyes, and he understood that a thing so clearly a person ought to have a name, and that he did not know the true names beastkin gave themselves, and that he would have to make do. The young Grimmox's coat, where it was not barred black and white, was a deep, warm reddish-brown, the color of banked embers, the color of the coals his father used to rake over in the evening while he talked. And the beast was warm to lie against, a living hearth in the cold of the deeps. "Cinder," Aldrich said, trying it. "I'll call you Cinder. If you don't mind it." The Grimmox, Cinder, considered this with apparent seriousness, and then pushed its blunt head against Aldrich's shoulder, once, deliberately, and made a low, rumbling sound deep in its chest that Aldrich chose, correctly, to take for assent. And that was how Aldrich Verne, alone at the bottom of the world, came to have a brother. They did not stay strangers long, the boy and the Grimmox, for the deeps left no room for it. Aldrich learned to read Cinder as he had once learned to read the wood above, by the set of the ears, the angle of the barred head, the timbre of the sounds that rumbled up out of that deep chest. And Cinder, for his part, learned Aldrich's speech faster than any beast had a right to, until Aldrich was half convinced the Grimmox understood every word and merely chose which to acknowledge. There was more than that, too. When they had traveled together some days and fought together some fights, Aldrich began to feel Cinder at the edge of his mind, the way he felt the quicken at the edge of his senses. A warmth, a presence, a wordless weather of feeling that was not his own. Wariness when danger neared. A dark satisfaction after a kill. And once, when Aldrich woke in the night, gripped by the gully and his father's laughter, a great gentle pressure against his thoughts, steady as a hand on the shoulder, that eased him back down into sleep. Beast speak, his father would have called it. The mind touch of the beastkin. Aldrich did not know its rules. He only knew that he was less alone than any words could measure, and that Cinder was not his pet, nor his mount, nor his hound, but his companion, his equal, the other half of a partnership neither of them had chosen, and both of them, having found it, would have died before giving up. They cleared the last of the bone meadow together, and it went easier two than one. Cinder could not fight as Aldrich fought. The Grimmox had none of the loom's honed seals, no quick-woven aptitudes. He grew, Aldrich came to understand, by a different and slower road, the beastkin road of blood and bloodline, ripening towards some inheritance that lay coiled and sleeping in him, and would wake, if it woke at all, only in its own time. But Cinder was strong past any beast of the surface, and his claws sheared stone. And when a knot of grave-born gloomspawn came at them in the mist, it was Cinder who broke their charge, bowling the pale things down and crushing them under his weight, while Aldrich killed among them with the sword. They fought well together. They fought, from the very first, as though they had always meant to. It was in the heart of the bone meadow, where the oldest and greatest of the orchard trees stood, that Aldrich came to the thing that changed everything. The tree grew from the grandest of the tombs, a broad, pale marble vault half sunk in the turf, its roots cracking the stone and prying up the old lid, so that the tree seemed to grow up out of a grave and to be, in some way, the grave's own dreaming. It was larger than any tree Aldrich had seen above or below, its dark canopy lost in the wan glow of the ward's false sky, and the air beneath it was different, thick, sweet, alive, the quicken pooling there so richly that Aldrich could all but see it, a faint silver shimmer moving through the leaves like wind that made no sound. Cinder would not go near it. The Grimox stopped at the edge of the tree's shadow and rumbled low and unhappy, and pressed his warning into Aldrich's mind. Old, watched, and would come no further. So Aldrich went on alone, drawn, his skin prickling. High in the tree, out of easy reach, a single fruit hung. It was silver white, and it glowed with a light of its own, a soft, steady radiance like a small court moon. And looking at it, Aldrich felt a hunger that was not of the belly, a deep, answering pull, as though the fruit and something in his own blood were leaning toward one another across the little distance. A wild boon. He knew the phrase from his father, though Berthold had spoken of such things as a maker speaks of a legend, a treasure grown in the deep places by no man's hand, ripened by the quicken itself, a life boon of enormous worth, so rare that most delvers went their whole lives and never saw one, so precious that men had killed and died for less. And it was earned, if it was earned at all, only by one who came to it alone and took it unaided. He climbed. His mending leg held, his fleet step found the branches, and though the tree seemed to grow no smaller as he climbed, seemed at times to lengthen against him, in the end he came level with the silver fruit and closed his hand around it, and it came free of the branch with a small sigh, like a held breath let go. The light of it ran up his arm and into him, and Aldrich Verne was, for one moment, weighed. He felt it happen. Not the fruit's own virtue, that came after, a slow, blooming warmth, a life-strength kindling in him that he would carry ever after, but something vaster and colder behind the fruit, some great attention turning briefly, fully, upon him. He felt himself seen. He felt the loom itself, or something that stood close beside it, take his measure, the way a master jeweler takes the measure of a stone that has come to him from a poor man's hand, and proves, against all likelihood, to be flawless. And into his mind, not in words but in a knowing that arrived whole and certain, came a thing his father had told him was a children's tale. Marked. He nearly fell out of the tree. He clung to the branch and shook, understanding it in pieces, each piece worse and more wonderful than the last. Marked. The rarest of all the loom's dispositions, a favor, a watchfulness, a secret weighting of the scales. It was said, in the tales the old women told at Three Hearths, that once in a long age the loom set its eye upon a soul and chose it, and thereafter that soul's every striving was answered more richly than another's, its rewards heaped higher, its road, not made easy, never easy, made possible, where for anyone else it would be flatly closed. The wild boon that would come to any delver once in 10 lifetimes had come to Aldrich because he was marked. And the gravekeeper's over-rich reward, and the loom's lavish measure for the nesting dark, and even, perhaps, the whole impossible run of his survival since the falls. He sat in the tree a long time. When at last he understood as much as he was going to, two things were clear to him, and he turned them over with the silver fruit's warmth blooming in his chest. The first was that this was a thing he must tell no one. If it were rare enough to be a children's tale, it was rare enough to be coveted past all reason. His father had been hunted his whole life for a method, for a way of braiding seals. What would men not do? What would the risen houses not spend to lay hands on a boy the loom itself had chosen to favor? He had lost one home to men's greed. He would not hang this new lantern out for the next Vask to see. Not the Underholts, if he ever reached them. Not the Chartry. Not anyone. He looked down through the branches to where Cinder waited at the shadow's edge, patient and worried, and he thought, him. Only him. He already knows more of my heart than words could tell. The second thing was worse, and it was this. If the loom would give a wild boon and a grace beyond measure to a marked soul for small strivings, then for the great striving, for the impossible thing, the warden slain uninitiated, it would give something Aldrich could not even imagine. The mad thought he had let himself want over the gravekeeper's corpse was no longer merely a way out of the dark. It was the greatest opportunity any soul had ever been offered, dangled in front of the one soul the loom had bent the rules to favor. He would never have this chance again. Once he took his calling and became vowed, the feat lost half its worth. The loom's greatest measure was reserved for the impossible, and a vowed man killing a warden was merely very hard, not impossible. It had to be now. It had to be while he was capped and unproven and marked. The window was his youth itself, closing a little with every day toward his calling. He climbed down out of the tree and went to Cinder, who pressed his great head against him and read at once, in the beast-speak way, the enormity of what had happened. And Aldrich knelt and put his forehead against the Grimox and let Cinder feel it all. The fruit, the weighing, the mark, the resolve hardening in him. "I'm going to kill a warden," he said aloud, so that it was said, so that it was real. Not sneak past one. Kill one, while I'm still uninitiated. For the grace and the way out, both. It's mad. I know it's mad. He drew back and looked into the dark, grave eyes. You don't have to. This isn't your loom, isn't your mark, none of it. You could find your own way home, back to your warrens, your own people. Cinder cuffed him. It was gentle, as the Grimox measured gentleness, a swat of one blunt-clawed paw that still knocked Aldrich onto his backside in the turf, and the feeling that came with it needed no translating. Do not be a fool. And under it, warm and fierce and absolute, the thing that Aldrich had not dared hope for, and had, without daring, hoped for all the same. Brothers. Together. Wherever. Together then, Aldrich said, laughing despite everything, wiping his eyes with the back of a filthy hand. Loom helped the both of us. Together. Far below the deeps, in a place that was not a place, in a confinement outside of ours, the Warden of the Deep felt the wild boon taken, and laughed. And the laughing was a terrible thing, for he had not had cause to do it in an age. He was very old, and he was very bound. Once, he no longer troubled to remember when, he had walked as something like a god's own overseer, a servant of the great weaving order that men in their small way called the loom, set to watch over a work of transformation vast beyond the grasp of any surface mind, the slow remaking of a whole world, the ripening of the reaches toward a change the folk above had not the first inkling of, and the work had stalled. Some fault in the weaving, some knot he could see and, bound as he was, could not himself reach to cut. For an age uncounted he had hung here in his out-of-time prison and watched the great work sit frozen, unable to touch the trial that would loose it, permitted only, by whatever crueler power had chained him, the smallest of liberties. He might see. And he might, here and there, at the very edges, wait a reward. Load the dice. Nudge the loom's blind generosity toward a soul of his choosing. For an age he had found no soul worth the spending. And then, a hunted boy had gone off a waterfall rather than be taken, and fallen through a threshold, and lived where he should have died. And the warden of the deep had looked at him, truly looked, as he had looked at 10,000 doomed delvers before, and seen something. A hardness, a refusal, a capacity, rare past rubies, to be broken and to reforge himself harder from the pieces. The very thing the stalled work needed, not strength, for strength was common, but a soul that would keep striving past the point where striving was sane, and could be given enough, at the right moments, to make the impossible merely lethal. So the warden of the deep had spent his little liberties on the boy. He had set the mark. He had bent the wild boons ripening to the boy's coming, and heaped the gravekeeper's grace, and would heap more. All of it toward one end that the boy himself had now, gratifyingly, chosen of his own will, to slay a warden while yet uninitiated. For that precise and impossible feat, was the knife that could cut the stalled work free. A warden's death by an unvowed hand at the loom's own favored moment would send a shock up through the whole weaving and loose the change at last, and the great work would turn, and the warden of the deep would have done, at the very end of his patience, the one thing his chains had left him room to do. The boy thought the choice was his. That was the beauty of it. The boy thought he hungered for the grace and the freedom, and he did, and the hunger was entirely his own, and the warden had only ever leaned upon a scale already tipping. That was all the manipulation the bound could manage, to find a soul already falling in the right direction, and give it, gently, a reason to fall faster. "Strive, little maker," the warden of the deep said, into the silence of his prison, watching the boy and his beast turn together toward the deeper wards. "Strive and be rewarded, and never once suspect whose hand it is that fills your cup. Come and break my chains for me, and think it was your own idea. It is a kindness of a sort. I would tell you if I could. I cannot. So, strive." And he settled back to watch and to wait what scales he could. The catacomb was the deepest part of the bone meadow, and it was there that Aldrich learned the shape of his own lack. He had grown strong past any reckoning of what an uninitiated boy should be. The mark heaping the loom's measure on his every hard-won victory, until he could feel the 20-fold cap no longer as a distant ceiling, but as a nearness, a limit he was pressing against from beneath. His seals had sharpened and multiplied. His body had hardened until blades turned on his skin that should have bitten. He and Cinder had become, in the clearing of the ward, something close to unstoppable among the common gloomspawn. And then they went down into the catacomb after the ward's last and deepest wardling. And Aldrich met a thing he could not touch, and all his strength turned to water in his hands. Zarel, some old inscription in the tomb passage named it. Zarel the sepulchre bound. And it was the ruin of what had perhaps once been a lord of the buried city this churchyard had served. It floated. That was the horror of it. The thing Aldrich's whole fighting art had no answer for. It hung in the cold air of the great central vault, a withered, crowned thing wrapped in the tatters of grave finery. Its feet a full spear's length off the ground, and it did not come to him, and it could not be reached. And from its raised skeletal hands it flung death. Not blades. Worked death. Canticles, the shaped and loosed workings of the quicken that Aldrich's father had spent his life inscribing into glass, and that Aldrich himself had never learned to make. Bolts of grinding cold that cracked the stone where they struck. Grey lashes of unbinding that made the very air rot. A word, spoken in a dead tongue, that stopped Aldrich's heart for one endless beat before his hammering will and his adamant-hardened body threw it off. He could not close the distance. Every time he came near, the sepulchre bound simply rose higher, drifting up out of reach, and rained its cold fury down. Cinder's claws found no purchase in the air. Aldrich's sword cut nothing. Its thrown stones the thing turned aside with a lazy gesture. They very nearly died. Aldrich took a lash of the grey unbinding across his ribs that opened his hardened flesh to the bone and left the wound cold and slow to close. And a bolt of that killing cold caught Cinder's flank, and the Grimox screamed. Aldrich felt it in his own mind, the bright agony of it, and staggered. And for one plunging instant, Aldrich saw how it would end. The two of them worn down in this cold vault by a thing they could not so much as scratch. Killed by a floating corpse because a boy with a sword had walked into a fight against magic, with no magic of his own. It was rapid reckoning that saved them in the end, the seal running its cold arithmetic through the terror. It floats by the quicken. The quicken pools. It is not rising freely. It is rising from something. Aldrich looked, truly looked, with his true sight, past the drifting horror to the vault itself, and saw the faint silver threads of the quicken feeding up into the sepulchre bound from a cracked sarcophagus at the vault's center. A wellspring, a root. He could not reach the caster. He could reach the root. He fought his way to the sarcophagus through the rain of death, Cinder shielding him with his own scarred body, and he drove Berthold's gift into the crack in the stone lid and levered with everything he had, and the old sarcophagus split, and the silver root of quicken feeding the sepulchre bound guttered and died. And Zarel fell. It dropped from the air like a cut puppet, crown and all, and struck the vault floor. And before it could gather itself, Cinder was on it, and then Aldrich, and they ended it there on the cold stone in a fury that was half revenge for the terror of it. When it was done, the loom's measure came, rich and heady, the greatest yet. But Aldrich hardly felt it, because he was sitting against the broken sarcophagus with his cold, torn ribs and Cinder's head in his lap. And he had learned the lesson, and the lesson had a shape now. And the shape was a wall standing squarely across the road he had chosen. I need magic. He said it aloud, into the cold vault. And it was not despair in his voice, but the flat certainty of a man reading a true map at last. He had beaten Zarel by luck, and by reckoning, and by Cinder's blood spent freely. And he had beaten it barely. And it had been a wardling. A warden would be worse. A warden he meant to choose to fight, to walk toward on purpose. And if that warden could work canticles as the sepulchre-bound had, or simply strike from a reach his sword could not answer, then all his hardness and all his speed would be worth nothing. And he and Cinder would die in some deeper vault, having learned nothing from this one. He could not go on as only a swordsman. He had known it, dimly, and refused it, because the answer frightened him nearly as much as the lack. For the answer was his father, the Vian craft, the glass-wright's art, the inscribing of glyphs, of worked patterns that held and loosed the quicken, the very thing men had hunted and killed Berthold to steal. Aldrich had grown up in the smell of glass dust and the small bright scratch of the stylus. He had watched his father etch living glyphs into plates of glass 1,000 evenings. He carried in his pack, this moment, the little kit of glass slivers and copper needles that was all that remained of that whole world of making. He had never learned it. He had meant to learn it after his calling, the way a boy always means to ask his father the important things later, when there is time. There had not been time. There is time now, he thought, with a grief so sharp it was almost sweet. Down here, there is nothing but time. He would learn his father's art in the dark, where no one could take it from him. He would make magic he could work while he fought, not a floating caster's slow rained-down death, but glyphs loosed mid-motion, canticles woven into the blade dance itself. His father inscribed glass. Aldrich would inscribe the fight. He would take the two halves of the Vern line, the glass-wright's glyphcraft and the warrior's steel, and he would braid them into a single thing that had never existed, and he would carry it to a warden's feet. He did not know yet if it could be done. He only knew he would spend himself finding out. "Come on," he said to Cinder, easing the Grimox's heavy head from his lap and climbing to his cold, torn feet. "We're done with this ward. There's nothing more it can teach me except that I've been going about this like a fool." He looked down the black throat of the tunnel that led away from the catacomb, down and sideways, toward whatever deep lay next. "We need a maker's ward. Old stone, old law, glass and glyph work. My father used to speak of a buried city of the mountain folk, said they were makers past any men living, said their ruins held craft the surface had forgotten." He managed a crooked smile. "If there's such a place down here, some drowned bastion of the old makers, then that's where a glasswright learns his trade. Let's go find it." And Cinder rose, favoring his cold, scored flank, and pressed his brother once against the shoulder. And they went down together out of the bone meadow into the deeper dark, toward the long road and the buried city, and the warden waiting at the end of it. The road to the buried city was long, and the deeps swallowed the count of days. Aldrich would never, afterward, be able to lay out that stretch of his life in its true order. It came back to him instead in the way a hard winter comes back, not as days, but as a single long weather endured, with certain bright and terrible hours standing up out of it like landmarks out of snow. He knew that seasons of the surface world must have turned above them, while they travelled and cleared and fought their way down and across through ward after ward of the undergloom, because he felt himself change, felt the boy who had gone off the sable fall recede behind him, until he could hardly find that boy's face in his memory. He grew. Cinder grew. That was the plainest measure of the passing time, for the young, stuck Grimox Aldrich had pulled from a crevice became, over those long months, a beast the size of a plough ox, and then larger. His shoulder rising past Aldrich's head, his barred face broadening, his ember-red coat thickening, his blunt claws lengthening into things that split stone like rotten wood. They fought through wards of drowned forest, and wards of black glass, and wards of endless stare. And in each the loom took Aldrich's measure, and heaped its marked reward. And in each, Cinder's slow blood ripened a little further toward its sleeping inheritance. And always, Aldrich felt the 20-fold cap nearer above him, the ceiling of his uninitiated strength, the limit he was straining toward from below and could not pass, and did not want to pass. Not yet. Not before the warden. Because the whole mad wager depended on his doing the impossible thing while still beneath that cap. And always, under everything, the other clock ran. His calling. The coming-of-age initiation waited for him, whether he willed it or no. A soul could not be held uninitiated forever, and Aldrich could feel the season of it approaching, the way a man feels a change in the weather in an old wound. When his calling came upon him, he would be made vowed whether he had earned his warden grace or not, and the window would close, and the greatest chance any soul had been given would be gone. So he drove himself, and Cinder with him, down the long road, racing a clock he could not see against a foe he had not yet found, learning his father's craft by failing at it 1,000 times in the dark. For he had begun the glasswork. It went badly at first, and then merely poorly, which felt like triumph. He had the theory in his blood from a childhood of watching, and he had his father's kit, and he had endless time, and no one to shame his failures but a patient Grimox. But he had learned soon that inscribing glyphs into glass plates, as his father had, was of no use to a man who meant to loose them mid-fight. A plate must be prepared beforehand, and carried, and shattered to loose its working, and a delver in a warden's shadow would have no hands free for such things. The canticle had to live on him, in him. The glyph had to be worked into his own flesh, etched, living into skin, and bound to the quicken flowing through his own body, so that a thought and a flexing of will could loose it while both his hands still held the sword. It was, he came to understand, precisely the thing no sane maker attempted. His father had inscribed glass because glass was dead and safe, and forgave a slip of the stylus. Flesh forgave nothing. The glass slivers of the kit could cut the glyphs, but a glyph miscut in living skin did not simply fail. It turned, loosing its half-made working back into the body that bore it. Aldrich burned himself. He froze a hand numb for a day. Once he cut a glyph across the back of his own forearm that flared as it closed and seared a scar he would carry always. And the pain of it dropped him retching to the stone, and Cinder stood over him keening, and Aldrich lay there and laughed through his teeth because it had almost worked. The working had almost held. He had felt it try to loose, the way his father's glass had loosed. The crude stylus was half his trouble. The tool in his father's kit was a maker's fine instrument, and Aldrich was no fine maker. His glyphs came out thick and coarse and unstable. He needed better law, better tools, a maker's own place to work. He needed, in short, exactly the buried city he had set out to find. They found it in the deep dark at the bottom of a long descending stair, and it was more than Aldrich had let himself hope. The Sunken Bastion, he named it, though some worn inscription over its shattered gate gave it a truer and older name. Duragar, in a runic script Aldrich could half read, for it was kin to the glyph lore in his blood. It was a city, or had been, a fortress city of the mountain folk, the old makers his father had spoken of, drowned whole in the deeps and set here to dream in the dark, like the Bone Meadows churchyard, but vaster past all comparison. Towers of black, fitted stone rose into the ward's false sky. Bridges leapt dry canyons. Halls stood open to the dark, their doors long rotted, and within them, Aldrich's heart leapt to see it. The tools and the leavings and the inscribed lore glass of a whole vanished people of makers. A civilization that had lived and died by the very craft he was killing himself to learn. And on the shorn summit of the city's central spire, where a threshold glow flickered that Aldrich's whole soul leaned toward, for it was high enough, near enough the top of the deeps, that the way it guarded might open not merely to a lower deep, but to the surface itself. There stood the warden. Aldrich saw it from across the drowned city, and knew it at once for what it was, and felt his mad wager settle into terrible reality in his chest. It was huge past the gravekeeper, past anything. A made giant, grey-skinned and slab-muscled, easily 4 times the height of a man, with a jaw like a rock slide, and small, deep eyes, and, dragging from one vast fist, a torn-up tower's worth of stone, bound into a crude and monstrous club. As Aldrich watched, it moved, not fast, but with a dreadful, unhurried certainty, and swung the club idly against a standing wall of the old city, and the wall, fitted stone that had stood 1,000 years, simply ceased, exploding into a hail of rubble that rang across the dead city like the fall of a house. The wall breaker, Aldrich named it, watching the dust settle. A wall breaker indeed. One blow of that club would end him, end Cinder, end the whole mad wager and the Vern line and the marked boy and all of it, in a single grey instant. Beside him, Cinder rumbled, low and deep, and pressed his enormous head against Aldrich's shoulder. And into Aldrich's mind came the Grimox's assessment, wordless and clear. Fear, yes, but under the fear, a wary weighing. Big, slow, ground-bound, no floating, no caster's rein, nothing Zarrel's kind of untouchable. A thing of the earth, however huge. And Cinder was a thing of the earth too, a delver, a shaper of stone, and the wall-breaker stood on a summit of old, fitted rock, and there were, the Grimox's cold beast wisdom suggested, ways to bring a giant down that had nothing to do with meeting its club. Beatable. Not easily, not without everything they had and more than they yet were, but beatable. That's the one, Aldrich said softly, and did not know whether he wanted to weep or laugh. That's our warden. Loom, help us, brother. That's the door home, and the greatest grace any fool ever reached for, and it's standing right there breaking walls for practice. He drew a long breath and let the fear settle into resolve, the way the venom dark had first taught him to do, so long ago, and so many wards above. We're not ready. Not yet. But this city was built by makers, and it's full of their lore, and I mean to become ready right here in the bones of it. He looked at the drowned halls, the waiting lore glass, the maker's tools gleaming dull in the dark. We clear the bastion. We take everything it can teach me. And then we climb that spire and we kill that thing. And we go home. Cinder answered with a sound that was almost a laugh, if a Grimox could laugh. And the two of them turned together into the dead city of Duragar to make a warrior maker of a hunted boy. The sunken bastion did not give up its lore for free. Aldrich had known there would be a guardian below the warden. There was always a deeper wardling in the great wards, a keeper of the place's heart. And in Duragar, the keeper was the vault ward. He found it in the city's core, in a great domed treasury hall where the mountain folk had kept their finest making. And it was itself a piece of their finest making, not flesh at all, but a thing of black stone and old bound quicken. A made sentinel in the shape of an armored giant, squat and immensely heavy, that woke when Aldrich crossed its threshold and came at him grinding across the vault floor with fists like millstones. It was a harder fight than Zarrel, and a cleaner one, because this foe stood on the ground and could be struck. But it was made of the same stuff as the city's walls, and Berthold's gift rang off its black hide and did not bite. And for a long and desperate while, Aldrich and Cinder could only stay alive, dancing back from those grinding fists, unable to so much as mark the thing. Aldrich's crude, half-worked glyphs, for he had a few now, coarse and unstable, etched into his forearms, loosed their small workings against the vaultwood's stone and guttered uselessly. Steel would not cut it. Glyph would not break it. It was Cinder who found the seam. The Grimox, fighting by the beast wisdom of his kind, stopped trying to strike the vaultward's armored body and set his claws instead to the vault floor beneath it, to the old, fitted stone the mountain folk had laid, which was to a Grimox not a wall, but merely earth of a harder kind, and dug. He undermined the giant. He tore the ground from under one of its millstone feet so that the vaultward, immensely heavy and slow, lurched and canted, and in the half-instant of its imbalance, Aldrich saw with his true sight the one place its makers had left vulnerable, the joint at the back of its knee, where the black stone gave way to a knot of bound and glowing quicken, the sentinel's own bound life. He drove into the gap Cinder's undermining had opened and set the point of Berthold's gift against that glowing knot, and loosed into it every crude glyph he bore at once, not to break stone, which they could not, but to sever the quicken binding, which they could. And the working caught, and the vaultward's bound life came apart, and the great made thing ground to a halt and toppled, and was still. The loom's measure came, rich and warming, but it was not the true prize of Duragar, and Aldrich knew it even as he took it. The true prize lay all around him in the opened treasury and in the halls beyond. The lore of the makers. He spent a long while in the drowned city after that, and it was the making of him. The mountain folk had been glasswrights past any craft the surface remembered. Their lore glass lay everywhere, inscribed plates and tablets and long unrolling scrolls of etched crystal, holding the accumulated glyphcraft of a whole vanished people. And Aldrich, who could half read their runic hand and wholly read the deeper grammar of glyph work he had drunk in from his father, fell upon it like a starving man upon a feast. Here were the principles he had been groping toward alone in the dark. Here were the stable forms, the true proportions, the way to bind a glyph so that it held and loosed clean instead of turning back on its bearer. Here were tools, a maker's fine styli of tipped crystal, worth more to Aldrich than all the treasury's dull gold, that let him cut a glyph as fine and true as his father ever had. He traded away the crude glass stylus of his father's kit with something like reverence, keeping it always, but working now with the maker's finer instruments. And under his hand, the coarse, unstable glyphs of the long road began at last to come clean. He was becoming a maker. Not merely a boy who watched his father make, a maker in his own right, working lore no living man on the surface possessed, in the bones of a city built by masters of his own craft. And in the long, focused hours of it, bent over the lore glass with Cinder dozing warm against his back, he felt his father near him as he had not since the gully. Not the grief of him, or not only the grief, but the company of him. The two of them bent over the same craft across the gulf of the dark, and Aldrich would sometimes speak aloud to that presence, working through a difficult glyph. "Is it so, father? Is this the way of it?" And though no voice ever answered, the work would come right under his hands, and it was answer enough. When at last he rose from the lore glass, he had what he had come down the long road to find. He had the maker's craft, clean and true and stable. He had the fine tools to cut it. He had everything he needed to attempt the thing his whole descent had been bent toward. The fusion, the braiding of glyph and blade into a single fighting art, and only the doing of it remained. "Now," he told Cinder, gathering the finest of the lore glass into his pack and the maker's styli into his father's old kit. "Now I make myself a weapon they've no name for. and then we go up that spire. He worked the fusion in a maker's hold he cleared near the base of the warden's spire. A chamber of black stone with a workbench the old makers had left, and good light from a vein of luminous rock, and a stout door that Cinder could hold against any wandering gloomspawn, while Aldrich bent to the most dangerous making of his life. For it was his own flesh he meant to inscribe. That had never changed. That was the whole of the innovation. His father inscribed glass because glass was dead and safe. Aldrich would inscribe living skin and bind the glyphs to the quicken flowing in his own body, so that they lived on him, part of him, and could be loosed by will alone in the heart of a fight with both hands full of sword. It was the thing no maker attempted, and now Aldrich knew why no maker attempted it. Because he had the maker's full lore before him, and nowhere in all their careful glass did they dare what he meant to dare. They had known it could be done. They had known what it cost. And they had, wisely, declined. Aldrich did not decline. He had a warden to kill, and no other road to killing it, and a father's craft to make wholly his own, and a stubbornness the loom itself had marked him for. He bent to the work. It was slow, and it was bloody. He cut the first true glyph into the skin over his own left forearm with a crystal stylus, and the maker's stable form held clear in his mind, and where 1,000 crude attempts on the long road had turned and burned and scarred, this one, cut clean, bound true, proportioned as the lore glass taught, held. He felt it take. He felt it settle into his flesh and root itself to the quicken moving through him. A living working, laid quiet and waiting under his skin, harming nothing, ready. He sat and stared at it and shook, and Cinder pushed against him anxiously, and Aldrich said, in a voice gone strange, "It worked. Loom above, Cinder. It worked. It's holding." He loosed it then, carefully, with a flexing of will, and a lash of crackling white light sprang from his open left hand, a small worked bolt of storm force, there and gone, scorching the far wall of the maker's hold, and filling the chamber with the sharp, clean smell of a struck sky. A canticle. A worked spell, loosed from his flesh, with his sword hand free the whole while. The fusion was real. It was crude yet, one glyph, one small working, and it had cost him blood and days, and nearly cost him his arm in the 1,000 failures before. He was no true canticle maker. He could feel that. Feel the vast gulf between this one scorching lash and the effortless rained-down death of the sepulchre-bound. What he had made was the barest seed of the thing he dreamed, a single fused working where his imagination wanted 100, and he understood, with the clarity that had been growing in him all through the deeps, that he would never come into the fullness of it as a mere, uninitiated boy. The calling would be needed for that, the great initiation that braided a soul's craft into a true and lasting discipline. What he made now was the crude proof. The calling, if he lived to reach it, would be the mastery. But the proof was enough. The proof was everything. He sat in the maker's hold, with his father's craft alive and crackling under his own skin. And he wept, once, for Berthold Vierne, who had died with this art still bottled in his skull, rather than let men take it, and who would never see his son make it live in a new way in the dark under the world. "I finished it, Father," Aldrich thought, holding up the glyph-scored arm in the luminous light. "You inscribed glass. I inscribed myself. It's the same art, and it's a new art, And it's ours. It's still ours. They didn't take it after all. He cut more glyphs. Over the days that followed, he inscribed the storm lash into both forearms, and a working of force into his palms, and a small hardening onto his chest over the heart. Each one clean and stable and true. Each one a small worked death he could loose while the sword sang. He was ready, as he would ever be. Arsenal, craft, and plan stood complete. There remained only the last preparation, and it was Cinder who raised it on the eve of the climb in the warm dark of the Maker's Hold. The Grimox had grown grave as the day of the Warden neared, and Aldrich had felt it through the bond. A gathering, a decision being turned over in that deep beast mind. And on the last night, with the wallbreaker's distant wall-breaking echoing down the spire, Cinder pressed his great head to Aldrich's and opened his whole heart in the beast-speak way, and showed him a thing. It came not as words, but as knowing, the way the mark had come. Cinder showed him the warrens of his people, green and deep and far, and the warren mothers, and the old blood law of the beastkin. And among that law, rare and revered, a thing the Grimox had carried sleeping in him all along, and had not, until now, understood how to offer. The hearth oath. The binding of hearths. Not the beast command by which lesser men yoked lesser beasts. Cinder showed Aldrich that too, and his revulsion at it, the leash, the mastery, the diminishment. But its opposite, and its better, a joining of two inmost hearths into one, freely given on both sides, an oath of the deep places by which two souls became, in the loom's own measure, a single, striving thing. Aldrich understood what he was being offered, and understood too the cost and the danger, because Cinder showed him that unflinching. No one had ever taken the hearth oath as Cinder meant to give it, as a capstone, the crowning working of the Grimox's ripening blood, offered not to another beastkin, but to a man, on the eve of a feat no bonded pair had ever attempted. What it would do to them, how it would change them, whether the joining of a man's hearth and a Grimox's would hold true, or turn as Aldrich's early glyphs had turned. None of it was known. Cinder showed him the risk plainly, and then showed him, under it, the thing that made the risk worth taking, that bound so, they would be one to the loom, one striving thing, and a feat achieved by one striving thing was credited whole to both halves of it. "If we're one to the loom," Aldrich said slowly, working it out aloud in the dark, "then when we kill the Warden, when I kill it uninitiated," he stopped. His heart was pounding. "Then you share it. The feat, the grace, the calling if it comes. It's yours as much as mine, because we're one soul striving. And I share your awakening, your blood, your Warren inheritance. If the oath makes us one, then when your bloodline wakes, it wakes for both of us." He looked into the dark, grave eyes. "We don't just fight the Warden together. We become the thing that killed it. Together, all the way down." Cinder rumbled assent, and under the assent, laid bare, was the true reason the Grimox offered it. Not the strategy, though the strategy was sound, but the simple whole want of it. "Brothers," the Grimox had said, that first day in the bone meadow, cuffing him into the turf. Brothers still, but the word had been a promise then, and the oath would make it a fact, written into the weave of both their souls past any parting. Cinder did not want to fight beside Aldrich. Cinder wanted to be one thing with him, and would risk the unknown for it, and was asking. That was the grave weight in him, that was the thing being turned over, whether Aldrich wanted the same. Aldrich found that he was weeping again, and did not care. "I lost my father," he said, "and I lost the whole world above. And I've spent this whole descent making myself hard enough to bear it. And then I pulled a stuck badger out of a crack in the wall. And you've been the only warm thing in the dark ever since." He laughed, wetly, and pressed his forehead harder against the Grimox's. "You daft beast. Of course I want it. Of course. Do it. Bind us. Let's be one thing and go kill a giant." And Cinder loosed the hearth oath. It was not like the glyphs. It was not like anything. Aldrich felt his inmost hearth, the deep, private fire of himself, the place where the boy on the ridge and the maker in the dark and the sun at the graveside all burned as one small flame, felt it open, and felt another fire lean into it, vast and warm and wholly other, ember red and stone deep and fierce with a loyalty that had no bottom. And the two fires touched, and did not turn, and did not consume one another, but joined, banking together into a single, greater hearth that burned in two bodies at once. Aldrich felt Cinder's heart beating in his own chest, and his own in Cinder's. He felt the Grimox's blood ripening in his veins, and his own hard-won seals threading into the Grimox. He felt the 10th and final strand of his father's coveted full weave, the braiding of all he was into one great whole, complete itself. Not through the Vern method his father had died guarding, but through this, the hearth oath as the last strand, the capstone the whole descent had been weaving toward. They came back to themselves slowly in the Maker's hold, breathing as one breath. Aldrich put his hand on Cinder's great flank and felt his own pulse under the fur, and Cinder rumbled, and Aldrich felt the rumble in his own chest, and neither of them could stop the fierce, trembling joy of it. "One thing," Aldrich whispered. "We're one thing now." He rose in the dead of that last night and made ready. He set out his drafts. The Maker's halls had given him more than law. He had a sunward draft for strength, and a harefoot for speed, and a moonwit for the clarity of a battle trance, and one other, hoarded and dreaded, that he set apart from the rest, and did not let his eyes rest on. A red-mind draft, the last resort draft, a working of such violent power that it burned the mind to a killing point, and then, when it faded, near always killed the one who drank it. He hoped not to need it. He set it where his hand would find it. He honed Berthold's gift until its pierced blade could part a falling hair. He checked each glyph in his flesh, stormlash and force and hardening, and found them true. He ate, and made Cinder eat, and rested what little he could. And when the ward's false light came up dim over the drowned city of Duragar, Aldrich Vern drank down his sunward and his harefoot and his moonwit draughts, and felt the strength and the speed and the cold, bright battle clarity flood through him, and through Cinder both, one thing, one striving thing. And the two of them turned to the long stair up the warden's spire, and began to climb toward the giant, and the threshold, and the way home. The summit of the spire was a shorn and broken plateau, roofless to the ward's false sky, floored with the rubble of the walls the wall-breaker had spent an age breaking. At its center, past the last of the fitted stone, the threshold glow pulsed, high, high, the topmost gate of the deeps, and Aldrich's whole soul leaned toward it, for he could feel, faint through all the layered dark, that it opened not to a lower ward, but up, out, to the surface world he had fallen from a lifetime ago. The door home, and between him and it, unhurried, turning now to face the two small climbers who had come up out of the dead city onto its plateau, stood the wall-breaker. It was worse. Close. Its grey hide was seamed and pitted like a cliff face. Its small, deep eyes held no malice and no mercy, only a made and mountainous certainty. And the club it dragged, a whole broken tower's worth of bound stone, scraped across the rubble with a sound like a landslide beginning. It looked at them. It did not hurry. Why would it hurry? It had stood this gate since before Aldrich's grandsires were born, and it had broken everything that ever climbed to it. And a boy and a beast were only the newest small things to break. Aldrich felt Cinder's heart hammer in his own chest, and his own in Cinder's, and under the shared fear he felt the cold, moonwit clarity settle over them both like still water. One striving thing. They did not need to speak the plan. They had lived it in the sharing of hearts. Ground it. Cripple it. Never once stand in the club's road. Save the last, worst draft for the worst moment, and pray it did not come. For my father, Aldrich said, to the giant, to the dark, to the one warm brother at his side. And to go home. He loosed the storm lash from his left forearm and charged. The white bolt of it took the wall-breaker across the eyes, not to harm, for it hardly marked that stone hide, but to blind and enrage, and it did both. The giant roared, a sound that shook rubble from the broken walls and swung the tower club down at the small darting shape of him. And Aldrich was not there. Fleetstep found the angle. The moonwit trance ran the arithmetic. He flung himself clear, and the club came down where he had been, and the whole plateau jumped with the force of it, a crater blooming in the fitted stone. And Aldrich felt the wind of it, and knew past all doubt that one touch was death. But the club came down, and that was the plan. That had always been the plan, born of Cinder's beast wisdom under the drowned city. When the club came down, the giant was, for one grinding half-instant, committed and open and rooted. And in that half-instant, Cinder struck. Not at the giant, at the ground, the Grimox tearing into the plateau's fitted stone with those stone-splitting claws, undermining the very footing the wall-breaker stood on. And Aldrich struck at the giant itself, darting in past the falling club to the great grey pillar of its leg, and set Berthold's gift against the back of its knee, and loosed his palm-worked forceglyph into the blade as it bit, driving pierced steel and worked force together deep into the joint. The wall-breaker did not fall, not yet. It was too vast to fall from one wound, but it faltered. The knee buckled and half gave. The giant lurched, and Cinder's undermining took that lurch and made it worse, the rubbled footing crumbling away beneath the shifting weight, so that the wall-breaker had to catch itself with the tower club against the stone, and for a moment it was not attacking at all, only keeping its feet. They had it. For one bright, soaring moment, high on the broken spire in the dark under the world, the boy and the Grimox had a warden reeling, and Aldrich heard himself laughing. The wild, bright battle joy the venom dark had first woken in him, now grown to a roar, and Cinder's roar answered it, one voice from two throats, one striving thing at the height of its striving. Then the wall-breaker caught itself, and swung sidelong without warning, not the great overhead blow they had learned to read, but a low, backhanded sweep of the tower club along the very ground. And there was no clean angle to dodge. And it caught Cinder full across the flank, and flung him tumbling across the plateau to crash into the broken wall, with a sound Aldrich felt in his own bones. The pain came through the bond like a spear through his own side. Aldrich staggered under it, the shared agony buckling his knees, and for one plunging heartbeat, the moonwit clarity drowned in it, and he could not tell which of them was hurt. could not tell whose ribs were cracked, could only feel the two of them, the one thing they were, reeling, half-broken on the plateau, while the warden gathered itself above them. He got up. Because they were one thing, and half of that thing was down, and the other half had to move. He got up and put himself between Cinder and the giant, its knee ruined, could not chase, but could still reach, and the tower club rose again against the false sky. The fight had turned. Aldrich knew it with the cold, moonwit part of him, even as the hot part of him refused it. They had hurt the wallbreaker. Badly, its knee gone, its mobility broken. But they had spent nearly everything to do it, and now Cinder was down and slow to rise, and Aldrich's glyphs were loosed, and needed time he did not have to build again. And the giant, crippled, grounded, enraged, was still a thing that could end them both with one reaching blow. His safe options were gone. The clean, planned, prudent path to the kill had closed behind that sidelong sweep, and there was only one thing left in his arsenal. The thing he had set apart and dreaded and prayed not to reach for. Aldrich's hand closed on the red-mined draft. He knew what it would do. He knew what it would cost. His father's kit knowledge and the maker's lore glass both had said the same, in the same grave words. The red mind burned the mind to a single killing point, gave a doomed strength past all mortal measure for a few violent minutes, and then, when it faded, near always killed the one who drank it in the ruin of the come-down. It was the draught a man drank when he had already decided to die and meant to take his enemy with him. I haven't decided to die, Aldrich thought, with a clarity that was almost calm, watching the tower club rise. I've decided to live, and this is the only road to living that's left, and if it kills me after, then it kills me after. But the warden dies first. He felt Cinder, through the bond, struggling up onto his feet again. Felt the Grimox understand what Aldrich held and what he meant to do. Felt Cinder's fierce refusal and acceptance both at once. Not that. Not the killing draught. And under it, then let me open the way, brother. One last time. On my mark, Aldrich said aloud, and unstopped the red mind and drank it down. The red mind took him like a struck sky takes a tree. There was no gentleness in it, no bright flood as the other draughts had come. It was a violence done to his own mind, the world narrowing in an instant to a single red point, all fear burned away and all thought with it, all the boy of him and the maker of him and the grieving son of him, seared down to one thing that had no name but kill. Colors went strange. Time went thick and slow. The tower club descending toward him was a mountain falling through honey, and Aldrich watched it come with a terrible glad calm, and stepped inside its arc as it fell. So close the wind of it tore at his hair, and it crashed into the plateau where he had stood, and he was already past it, already at the giant's ruined knee, already climbing. He felt Cinder move through the bond, felt the Grimox, cracked ribs and all, drive himself not at the giant's body, but down, into the plateau's broken stone at the warden's feet, burrowing, vanishing beneath the rubble with those stone-splitting claws, opening a way up into the giant from below, where no armor and no wariness guarded. One striving thing, striking from two directions at once, the man climbing the outside, the beast tunneling the inside. And the warden could not answer both. Aldrich climbed the wallbreaker. He went up the vast grey body hand over hand, Berthold's gift clenched in his teeth like a boarding pirate's blade, the red mind's strength making nothing of the climb that should have been impossible, driving the crystal styli of his father's kit into the seamed hide for handholds where there were none. The giant felt him and roared and reached back with a slab-fingered hand to pluck him off, and Aldrich loosed the last of his rebuilt stormlash into the groping fingers, and the hand recoiled, and he climbed on, up the shuddering flank, up onto the great heaving shoulder, up to the base of the rock-slide jaw where, between the slabs of muscle, the ribs rose and fell over the giant's made and mountainous heart. And beneath, cinder broke through. Aldrich felt it, felt the grimox erupt up into the warden's guts from below, tearing, and felt the giant's whole, vast body convulse around the wound. And in that convulsion, that final, terrible distraction, Aldrich set the point of Berthold's gift between two of the wallbreaker's ribs, over the heart, and drove it in with both hands and all the red mind's doomed strength and all the weight of everything he was. The pierced blade went in to the diamond-latticed fuller, and it was not enough. A heart that size was not stopped by a single thrust. So Aldrich did the last and worst thing, the thing that would cost him, and did not hesitate, because the red mind left no room for hesitating. He wrapped both hands around the hilt and sawed, working the blade side to side inside the giant's chest, carving through the great, slow heart, and the wallbreaker's death throw caught his hands against a grinding rib and closed on them, and took from him, in a red instant he barely felt through the draught, 3 fingers of his left hand and 2 of his right. He did not stop. He sawed through the heart with what remained of his hands, and the warden's heart came apart, and the wallbreaker died. It died standing, the way it had done everything, with a slow, mountainous certainty. The huge body simply ceased to be a living thing and became, between one heartbeat and the next, a falling weight of grey stone flesh. And Aldrich rode it down, clinging to the hilt buried in its chest, and cinder tore free of the collapsing body below, and the giant struck the ruined plateau with a crash that flung rubble to the false sky, and lay still. And the threshold blazed. The topmost gate of the deeps that had pulsed dim behind the warden's guarding bulk flared up all at once into a pillar of clean white light that filled the broken summit. And Aldrich, lying half-crushed against the dead giant's chest, with his maimed hands still locked around his father's sword, saw it through the failing red haze of the red mind, and understood, distantly, that it was the way home come open at last, and that he had done the impossible thing, and that he was almost certainly about to die of the doing. For the red mind was fading. He felt it go the way the Maker's law had promised, the killing point of his mind guttering, and behind it, rushing in to fill the ruin, the come-down, a black tide of collapse rising through him to drown the thing the draft had made. His heart stuttered. His maimed hands did not hurt yet, and that was the worst sign of all. The white light of the threshold swam and dimmed. I killed it, he thought, with the last clear thought the draft left him. Father, cinder, I killed it, and the door's open, and I don't think I can. Then cinder was there. The grimox dragged himself, broken and bleeding, across the rubble to his fallen brother, and pressed his great head against Aldrich's chest, as he had that first day in the crevice. And through the hearth oath, through the joined and burning single fire of the two of them, cinder poured what he had, his own strength, his own steadying blood, his own refusal, vast and warm and stubborn as stone, laid like a hand over the guttering flame of Aldrich's failing hearth. No, not that. Not you. We are one thing, and I will not let half of us die on the far side of the door we opened together." And the black come-down tide met the Grimox's stubborn warmth and broke against it, and Aldrich's stuttering heart caught and steadied and held. He did not die. He lay against the slain warden with the way home blazing white above him, and his brother's heart beating in his own maimed chest. And he did not die, and after a long while, he understood that he was not going to. That the worst of the red mine's price had been paid by 2 hearts instead of 1, and so had not, quite, come due in full. He turned his head and found Cinder's dark, grave eye a handspan from his own, and he laughed, a cracked, spent, weeping laugh. And Cinder rumbled, and the sound of it was the best thing Aldrich had ever heard. "We're alive," he croaked.
"You mad, wonderful beast. We killed a warden and we're alive."
They lay together a long while in the white blaze of the opened threshold before either could move, and it was in that stillness, as the last of the draughts drained out of him and the true depth of his hurts came clear, that Aldrich took the measure of what the victory had cost. His hands. He made himself look, and it was bad. 3 fingers gone from the left, 2 from the right. The wounds strangely clean where the giant's death grip and his own worked hardening had cauterized them, but gone for good. No draught in the world regrew a finger. He was maimed. The sword hand that had driven Berthold's gift through a warden's heart would never again close quite the way it had. He looked at the ruin of his hands, the Maker's hands, the hands he had spent this whole descent teaching to cut clean glyphs and hold true steel. And grief rose in him, and then, oddly, settled. He had paid a price a delver could pay. He had his life, and his brother's, and his sight, and his mind, and the craft lived in more than fingers. It was a wound, not an ending. He had learned in the deeps the difference. Cinder was hurt worse and would mend better. Cracked ribs, a torn flank, the Grimox's stone-tough body already knitting even as they lay there, and Aldrich tended what he could with his ruined hands and the last of a mending draught. And Cinder tended Aldrich in the beastkin way, pressing warmth and steadiness through the bond. And slowly, the 2 of them came back from the far edge they had gone to together. And then the loom answered. Aldrich felt it begin as the wild boon had begun, long wards ago in the spirit tree's grove, that vast, cold attention turning upon him, taking his measure. But where the boon's weighing had been a moment, this was an unfolding, a great and deliberate reckoning of a thing the loom had perhaps never had cause to reckon before. He had slain a warden. He had slain it, uninitiated, capped, unproven, a boy beneath the 20-fold ceiling, doing the labor of vowed companies. And the loom, which measured all striving and reserved its very greatest measure for the impossible, poured out that greatest measure now. The graces came first, the permanent accolades, the honors that clung to a soul forever after, and Aldrich felt them settle into him one after another, rare and weighty past anything the deeps had yet given, the loom's own acknowledgement of a feat that had, perhaps, no precedent. Slayer graces, unvowed warden graces, honors he had no names for, that would mark him ever after to any eye that could read the loom's weaving. And through the hearth oath, through the one striving thing they had become, he felt them settle into Cinder too, both halves of the single soul credited whole, exactly as the oath had promised. And behind the graces, vaster, came the thing Aldrich had wagered everything to reach. The calling. He felt it open in him like a door swinging wide, the great coming-of-age initiation that fixed a soul's discipline and braided its earned seals into a lasting craft, and made an uninitiated boy at last into a vowed maker. Come upon him not at the appointed season, not by the slow turning of years, but now, triggered by the impossible feat itself, the loom itself declaring that a soul which had done this thing had earned its calling in the doing. The white blaze of the threshold blurred and softened around him. The dead warden and the broken plateau, and even Cinder's warm weight receded, growing distant and dreamlike. And Aldrich felt himself drawn gently down and inward, out of the deeps and out of the dark, into the calling vision, toward the choosing that would remake him. The last thing he felt, before the vision took him, was the hearth bond thinning, Cinder drawn away into a vision of his own, the Grimmox's ripened blood answering the same summons in its own beastkin way. And Aldrich reached after that warmth even as it faded, and felt Cinder reach back, and then the two of them were parted for the first time since the crevice, each borne away into a separate becoming, and Aldrich went down into the light alone. He woke in the pinewood of his childhood. Aldrich knew it was not real, and knew it all the same. This was the high shoulder of the reaches, where he had run the deer paths as a boy, where the pines grew tall and red-barked, and the light came down through them in long golden bars, where his father had first put a stylus in his small hand and a sword in the other. The air was warm and smelled of resin and sun. Somewhere a jay quarrelled. It was a summer afternoon of a kind Aldrich had not stood in for a lifetime, and the loom had woven it around him whole, out of his own deepest ease, a place of comfort in which to make the choosing that would decide the rest of his days. His hands, in the vision, were whole. He looked at them and understood the kindness of it, and was not deceived by it. "They always pick a fair place for it," said a voice behind him. "The loom, I mean. It reaches into you and finds somewhere you loved and builds the vision there, so the choosing goes gentle. Mine's the same wood. I suppose that shouldn't surprise me." Aldrich turned. An old man sat on a fallen pine in a bar of golden light. Old, truly old. White-haired and seamed and easy in his body the way a man is easy who has come a very long way and arrived. And Aldrich knew him at once, with a lurch of the heart, because the old man had his own face, grown ancient, his own grey eyes, gone kind and tired and knowing. The maker Aldrich might become, if he lived long enough to become anything, worn into the vision by the loom to be his guide. "You're me," Aldrich said, "a version of you. A guess the loom makes, dressed up to do the talking." The old man smiled, and it was Aldrich's own smile, crooked, weary. "It's easier to hear hard things from your own mouth. Sit, lad. We've a choice to make, and not long to make it, and you've earned the sitting." Aldrich sat. The bark was warm under him. Down the golden aisle of the pines he thought, for one aching instant, that he saw a broad-shouldered figure with a pierced sword and a limp, watching from the shadow of the trees. But when he looked full, it was only light and pine, and the old man's eyes followed his and softened. "He's not here," the old man said gently. "The loom weaves comfort, not the dead. But the craft is here, and the craft is his, and in that much he's here too. Which is what we need to talk about." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You've done a thing, Aldrich. You've done a thing that near never gets done, and the loom's ready to make you vowed for it, and it's ready to be generous, because you came to your calling by a road almost no one walks. Most boys reach this wood with a handful of thin seals and pick some safe small discipline and go home. You've reached it with 10 strong seals, braided near to a full weave, a warden's death behind you, graces on you that I can barely look at, and a fused art in your own flesh that no maker in 1,000 years has dared to make live." The old man's ancient eyes were very steady. "The loom will let you evolve 4 of those seals to rare tier, and take near any discipline you can imagine. You could be a glasswright past your father, a true canticle maker, a caster who rains worked death from a reach no blade could answer, the greatest maker the surface has seen in an age. That road's open to you. It's the high road. It reaches heights the other doesn't." "But," Aldrich said, "but it means putting down the sword." The old man said it plainly. "The pure high glyphcraft and the blade dance, they pull 2 ways at the deepest reaches. To have the very topmost of the one, you give up the other. Choose the pure maker's road, and you'll be mighty past reckoning. And you'll rain canticles like the thing in the catacomb that near killed you. And you'll never again be the man who climbed a warden with a sword in his teeth. Or," and here the old man's voice changed, and Aldrich heard in it, unmistakably, his father's cadence, worn into his own aged voice by the loom, or by the long years, or by both. "Or you take the road you've already been walking. The fused road. Glyph and blade, braided into one discipline. The thing you made yourself in the dark. It won't reach the pure maker's heights. You trade the topmost peak for the joining, but it'll be yours. All of it. The whole of what you are and not half. The son of a glasswright who would not put down his sword. The boy who inscribed his own flesh so he'd never have to choose. The man who killed a giant with worked steel." The old man spread his whole hands in the golden light. "That's the choice. Height or wholeness. The loom won't judge you either way, but you should choose it knowing." Aldrich sat in the warm, woven pinewood with his father's craft alive in his memory, and his brother's hearth banked somewhere in a vision of his own, and he found that he did not have to think long at all. He thought of Berthold in the gully, choosing to die whole rather than let men take half of him for a method. He thought of the long road in the dark, cutting glyphs into his own arms 1,000 times over, rather than accept that a swordsman could not learn magic. He thought of the fused art crackling under his skin, the storm lash and the blade in one motion, the thing that was his father's craft and a new craft and ours, still ours. They didn't take it after all. He had never once, in all the descent, wanted to put down the sword to become a caster. He had wanted, always and only, to make the 2 things one. "I didn't inscribe my own flesh so I could choose," Aldrich said quietly. "I did it so I'd never have to." He met the old man's ancient grey eyes, his own eyes, and did not waver. "I'll take the road I made. Glyph and blade. The fused discipline. I don't want the peak if I have to cut myself in half to stand on it. My father wouldn't put down his sword, and I won't put down his craft. I'll have both, or I'll have neither." A crooked smile, matching the old man's own. "Rune right of the blade. If the loom's got a name for it, and if it doesn't, then let mine be the first." The old man looked at him for a long moment, and something moved behind the ancient eyes that might have been pride and might have been grief, and was, Aldrich thought, the same thing wearing 2 faces. The look his father had worn in the gully, the look of a man watching someone he loved choose the hard whole road over the easy half one, and hurting for the cost of it, and glad past words of the choosing. "Rune right of the blade," the old man said, and the woven pinewood brightened around them as the loom took the name and made it true. "Aye, that's the one I chose too. That's the one that gets you here." He gestured at his own old, whole self, his long life, his arrival. To this wood, with your hands full of both the things you love. It's the harder road, lad. It's the longer one. You'll meet men mightier than you who took the high peak, and you'll wonder, some grey mornings, whether you chose wrong. The old man rose, and the golden light gathered to him. You didn't. Now hold still. This is the part that changes you. It's going to feel like being unmade and made again, because that's exactly what it is. Your father's craft, and your own steel, and your brother's hearth, all braided into one lasting thing. Let it happen. Don't fight it. And when you wake... The light took the old man's last words, and took the pine wood, and took the warm summer afternoon, and Aldrich felt his 4 rare seals begin to evolve, and his whole self begin to come apart along the lines of the discipline he had chosen. Unmade and made again. And he did as the old man said, and did not fight it, and let the joining happen. The unmaking and remaking was the strangest agony Aldrich had ever known, and there was no pain in it at all. He felt his 4 chosen seals evolve. Rapid reckoning and the fighting poise and the true sight and the hardening, the 4 that mattered most to the fused road, felt each one deepen and richen past the tear it had held, rare now, worked to a keenness no uninitiated boy could have carried. And around them the loom braided the whole of him into the discipline he had named. His father's glyphcraft, and his own long-learned blade, and the maker's stable law, and the hearth oath's shared fire. All of it drawn together and rewoven into a single, lasting art that lived in him now not as a crude proof cut painfully into his own flesh, but as a discipline, native and whole, the way a bird's flight lives in the bird. And when the reweaving had settled, the guide's last gift came. It came as the old man had promised, a runic canticle glyph, offered not in words now but woven directly into Aldrich's remade understanding, a worked pattern of such elegance and such ruinous complexity that Aldrich, looking on it with his newly evolved glyph lore, understood at once that he could never have made it himself, not in 100 years in the dark. It was a master's canticle, a vowed maker's working, given to him because he was a vowed maker now and had the discipline to bear it. And he understood, too, what it was. It was the storm lash he had cut so crudely into his own arms, grown up and made whole. The same white-worked lightning, but true now. A canticle that drew on his own flesh and the quicken flowing through him, and loosed a lash of storm force with a reach and a fury his crude glyphs had only gestured at, and could be loosed mid-motion, sword-hand free, exactly as he had dreamed on the long road. The fused art realized. His father's craft and his own steel made one true thing at last. Stormlash, the loom, named it in him, and he took the name. He was taught it, then, in the out-of-time way of the calling vision, the loom weaving the working into him and letting him practice it in the dream until his remade hands knew it, until he could raise the storm and loose it and shape it, until it was as much his as the smell of pine or his father's face. He loosed it 100 times in the woven pine wood and felt it come cleaner each time, felt the discipline settle deeper, felt himself become, stroke by practiced stroke, the thing he had spent the whole descent striving toward. A runewright of the blade, the first of that name. A maker who fought with worked lightning in one hand and a pierced sword in the other, and did not, ever, have to choose between them. And then the vision thinned, and the pine wood faded, and the golden light let him go. And Aldrich Verne woke on the broken plateau under the world. The waking was hard, his body reporting all its true hurts at once, the maimed hands, the deep drained ache of the drafts and the fight, the cold stone under him. But under the hurts, threaded all through his remade self, was the discipline, real and lasting, and his. And he lay on the rubble and felt Stormlash waiting in him like a held breath, and felt his evolved seals humming keen, and knew that the boy who had climbed this spire was gone for good, unmade and made again, and that the man lying here in his place was vowed at last. And the bond came back. He felt it return the way warmth returns to a numbed hand. The hearth oath, thinned to almost nothing while they were each born into their separate visions, flooding back full and fierce as Aldrich woke. Cinder's banked ember fire rushing into his inmost hearth and joining it once more. One thing again. Whole again. And Aldrich gasped with the sheer relief of it, the homecoming of it, not having known until it returned how cold the vision had been without it. "Cinder," he said, and turned his head, searching. The Grimox lay a few spans off across the rubble, still deep in his own awakening, his great barred body twitching now and again as whatever vision held him did its work. But through the restored bond, Aldrich could feel him there, feel the beastkin becoming that was working through his brother even now, and he pushed himself up onto his ruined hands to watch and to wait for the other half of the one thing they were to finish coming into its own. In his own vision, Cinder walked in a burrow that was also a warren, that was also, somehow, the whole green, deep interior world of his people, and an old Grimox waited for him there. Aldrich could not see it. The bond carried feeling, not sight, and Cinder's awakening was the Grimox's own. But afterward, in the way the two of them came to share the deep things, Aldrich would understand something of what befell his brother in that dreaming. That the old Grimox who guided him was called Mother Grieve, a warren mother of the beastkin, ancient and vast and warm as banked earth, woven by the loom, or by whatever tended the beastkin's own weaving, out of the deep blood lore Cinder carried. That she named for him at last the thing that had slept in his blood since before the crevice, the ripening inheritance that his years in the dark and his strivings beside Aldrich, and above all the impossible shared feat of the warden's death, had brought at last to waking. The Wardstone bloodline, a rare and revered line of the Grimox kind, the blood of the great stone shapers, the deep delvers who did not merely dig the earth, but commanded it. That she showed him what it would make of him, and asked, in the beastkin way, whether he would take it. And that Cinder, who had wanted only ever to grow strong enough to stand beside his brother, took it gladly and wholly, and was awakened. Aldrich felt it happen from the outside, and it was a marvel. The Grimox's great body, already grown across the long descent from a stuck cub to a plough ox and past it, began to change, not merely to grow, though it grew, the shoulders broadening, the barred head widening, the ember coat thickening and darkening toward the deep red of banked coals, but to come into some fuller stature that had waited coiled in it all along, a rightness, a completion. Cinder's evolving seals Aldrich felt through the bond, keening sharp as his own had, the beastkin's own strivings honored in the same great reckoning, and under it all, waking, the Wardstone blood. Aldrich felt the stone of the plateau itself seem to lean toward his brother as the bloodline came awake, felt the deep answering kinship between the Grimox and the living rock, and understood that Cinder would never again merely dig through stone, but would, in some measure, be able to ask it to move and be answered. The Grimox woke. His eyes opened, dark and grave as ever, and wiser now and older. A beastkin come of age, and he lifted his great head from the rubble, and he was, Aldrich saw with a lurch of pride and wonder, magnificent. A full-grown Wardstone Grimox, larger than any beast of the surface world, his ember coat drinking the threshold's white light, and his blunt claws gleaming, and a new deep power banked in him like a furnace. He looked at Aldrich across the little distance of broken stone, and Aldrich looked at him. Each of them transformed. Each of them come through their separate becoming into the fullness of what the descent had made them. And for a long moment, neither the man nor the Grimmox could do anything but stare at the other in shared awe. Then Cinder heaved himself up onto his great new legs and crossed the rubble to his brother, and pressed his enormous head against Aldrich's chest, as he had that first day in the crevice, and every hard day since. And it was so much larger a head now that it near bowled Aldrich over. And Aldrich laughed, and caught himself, and threw both his ruined arms around the broad ember neck, and held on. "Look at you," Aldrich said, muffled in the coarse, warm fur, his voice thick. "Look at you, you great mountain. You awakened." Mother Grieve, I felt her. I felt some of it. Your blood, your Warren's, you came into it, your... He drew back and held the Grimmox's barred face in his maimed hands and looked into the grave, dark eyes. "You're a Wardstone Grimmox. You're grown. You could have been this all along if you'd never fallen down here, could have grown up safe in your green Warrens, and instead you got stuck in a crack in the world and pulled out by a half-drowned boy and dragged through every ward of the deeps." Cinder rumbled, and through the bond came the answer, warm and fierce and final. The same answer he had given in the Bone Meadow when Aldrich first offered him the way home. "And I would do it again. All of it. For this. For us." And under it, wondering, a little awed, the Grimmox turning his own transformation over. "And look at you, brother. Vowed. A maker. The storm in your hands." "Aye," Aldrich said softly, and raised one maimed hand between them, and let a small, careful thread of stormlash crackle white across his fingers. The fused art, the true canticle, loosed clean and controlled, and his. Cinder's eyes widened at it, and Aldrich grinned, fierce and wet-eyed and glad. "Runewright of the blade, first of the name. My father's craft and my own steel, and I never had to choose between them after all." He closed his hand, and the storm winked out. "We did it, Cinder. We came down here two lost, half-drowned things, and we're walking out something else entirely. Both of us. Together, all the way down, just like the oath said." They stood together on the broken summit of the drowned city, the maimed young Runewright and the awakened Grimmox, and took the measure of one another and of themselves, transformed past all knowing from the boy and the cub who had met in the dark, and the white threshold blazed beside them, patient, open, the way home come at last. There was nothing to keep them in the deeps any longer, and everything above to draw them. And yet Aldrich stood a moment at the very lip of the blazing threshold, and could not, for that moment, step through. Cinder felt his hesitation and pressed against him, questioning, and Aldrich put his ruined hand on the great ember shoulder and let out a long breath. "It's only," he said, and stopped, and tried again. "The last time I went through a threshold, I was running for my life and leaving my father to die. And now I'm going back up through one, and he still." His throat closed. "He won't be up there, Cinder. Whatever's up there, it won't have him in it. Part of me's been telling myself this whole descent that if I just lived, if I just got strong enough and got out, I'd..." He shook his head. "There's no getting out to. Not to him. I've known it since the gully. I just haven't had to stand at the door and know it." Cinder said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the bond did not already say better. only leaned his awakened weight against his brother, and let his warmth carry the grief. Shared, halved, the way the oath halved all things now. And after a while, Aldrich straightened, and wiped his face with the back of a maimed hand, and managed the crooked smile. "Grief later," he said, and it was his father's voice he said it in, and he knew it, and let it be. Live now. All right, live now. He set his hand flat against Cinder's flank. "Come on, brother. Let's go home. Or up, at least. There's no home left, but there's up, and it's got a sun in it." They stepped through the threshold together. The passage was nothing like the fall had been. No plunge, no crushing water, no terror. Only a moment of clean, white light and a sensation of rising, of the whole vast weight of the layered deeps sliding away below them, ward upon ward upon ward of dark that Aldrich had crossed on his belly, and his bleeding feet now falling away beneath him in an instant. And then, air. Real air. Cold and thin and moving. Air with weather in it. Air that smelled of pine and snow and stone, and the huge living green of a world under an open sky. And Aldrich Verne came up out of the undergloom onto the surface of the hollow reaches, and fell to his knees in snow, and wept, for the second time, that he could not stop, and did not try to. It was winter above. He had gone down in the green of summer and come up into deep winter, and did not know if it was the winter after, or the winter after that, or some winter further still, only that seasons upon seasons had turned above while he strove in the timeless dark, and it did not matter, because it was sky, a great pale winter sky, with a low sun in it, an actual sun, the first honest light Aldrich had stood under in a lifetime of the deeps. And it was pinewood, red-barked and snow-laden, climbing away up the shoulder of the reaches toward the white teeth of the sundering peaks. And it was wind, moving in the boughs with the sound he had not heard since the birds went silent before the hunters came. And it was, after everything, after all of it, the world above. Home, or the shape of home, the country he had been born to, opened again around him wide and cold and unbearably beautiful. Beside him, Cinder had gone utterly still, his great head lifted, his nostrils working, drinking the surface air of a world he had glimpsed only through a crevice and a fall. And through the bond, Aldrich felt the Grimox's wonder crest and break. The beastkin who had been lost so long from any green thing, standing now in a whole, living wood. And Aldrich laughed through his tears, and flung an arm around the ember neck, and the two of them knelt together in the snow beneath the pines, and simply were, alive, above, out, for a long, shining while, asking nothing more of the world than that it go on being there. And then Aldrich felt the other thing. It came to him slowly, as the first joy quieted. A wrongness threaded through the rightness, a strangeness in the very air of the reaches he had been born to. The quicken. He had learned to sense it in the deeps, the world's fine, flowing power, and he sensed it now, here, in the surface wood. And it was wrong. Too much of it, far too much. In his boyhood, the quicken had lain over the reaches, thin and quiet, a faint shimmer a maker had to reach for. Now it lay thick over the winter wood, dense and rising, pooling in the hollows and running in the pines like sap. A richness that had no business in a surface world, and that Aldrich, with his evolved true sight and his rune-wright's craft, could all but see. He rose slowly to his feet and turned, reading the wood with new-made senses, and did not like what he read. "Something's changed," he said quietly. "Up here, while we were down." He looked at the thick, shimmering quicken pooling under the pines, felt it rising, felt it climbing, and a cold understanding settled in him that had nothing to do with the winter. The whole world's filling up with it. The quicken. It was thin as water when I was a boy, and now it's... Cinder, this is what feeds the deeps. This is what makes the wards, and the wardlings, and the wardens. This much of it, up here, on the surface. He trailed off, following the thought where it led, and did not want to arrive. The beasts. The ordinary beasts of the reaches. The wolves, and the bears, and the boars. If the quicken's rising up here the way it does down there, they'll change. They'll grow. They'll become what the gloomspawn are. The whole surface world's going to turn into a kind of deep. Cinder rumbled low, and through the bond came a grim, confirming weight. The Grimox's blood law stirring, some old beastkin knowledge of a change that came upon the world in its long turnings, feared and foretold. And Aldrich stood in the snow with his transformed hands and his newborn discipline, and understood that he had climbed out of one dark country into a world that was, slowly and surely, becoming another. He did not yet have a name for it. He would learn the name later from others in the days to come. The great weaving, the world's long-stalled transformation come at last unstuck and turning, the surface ripening toward the wildness of the deeps. He knew only, standing there, that the peace of the sunlit wood was a thin and passing thing, and that the world he had fought so hard to return to was not going to stay the world he had left. "Well," Aldrich said at last, and the crooked smile came back, tired and unbeaten. "It seems the world didn't wait for us to catch our breath. It never does." He turned from the thick, shimmering wood to his brother. "We can't just stand in the snow being glad we're alive, more's the pity. There's too much to do. And now there's this on top of it." He gestured at the rising quicken. "Which means the first thing hasn't changed. We go to Three Hearth." Cinder tilted his great barred head, and Aldrich answered the unspoken question. "It's the nearest thing to family I have left in the world. My father sent me there that last day. Told me to find a family called the Underhalt and say Berthold's son had come. I never made it. I went off the Sablefall instead. But they're still there, if the reaches haven't turned too far. And they knew my father, and..." His voice roughened. "And someone in Three Hearth might know what became of him. Whether Vask took him alive to the house, or whether it ended in the gully. I've told myself the hard truth 100 times down there in the dark. But I don't know it, Cinder. I don't know what happened after I turned and ran. And I have to. I have to learn the end of it, or I'll be running from that gully the rest of my life." He drew a breath. "So, Three Hearth first. To learn my father's fate, and to warn all of them, what's coming into the wood. They're frontier folk. They'll believe a thing they can see rising in the air if a maker shows them how to look. They deserve the warning." Cinder rumbled agreement, and then pressed a further thought through the bond. "And after?" And Aldrich's grey eyes went cold and clear. "And after," he said, "Bleak Hollow. The market town in the mountain's shadow. There's a guild there, the Delvers Chartry, that brokers the deeps and knows the houses, and has coin and reach and 100 hard delvers on its rolls. A runewright of the blade who killed a warden uninitiated." He allowed himself a grim flicker of the old battle joy. "That's a man the Chartry will want to keep sweet. I can trade what I am for backing, for information. For the one thing I've wanted since the day my father slapped me and shoved me into the trees." His maimed hand closed slowly. "House Lorcow spent 40 years and a fortune hunting my family for a method. They sent Vask the Seamed to take my father apart. I mean to find out whether my father's alive to be freed, or dead to be avenged. And either way, I mean to walk into whatever hall House Lorcow keeps its comforts in. And I mean for the last thing they see to be the son of the line they thought they'd finally ended. They wanted the Vern full weave." The storm stirred faint and white across his ruined fingers, unbidden. "They can have it. I'll deliver it personally." Cinder made a sound that was, unmistakably now, a Grimox's laugh. A deep, rolling rumble of fierce approval. And Aldrich laughed with him, and the two of them stood a moment in the snow. The maimed young Runewright and the awakened Grimox, one striving thing, with a father to find and a house to answer, and a whole changing world rising around them, and were not, in that moment, afraid of any of it. "It's a long way to Three Hearth on foot," Aldrich said, eyeing the deep snow and the climbing wood. "And these hands aren't much for." He got no further, because Cinder, with the grave, deliberate air of a beast who had been waiting for exactly this, folded his great awakened bulk down into the snow beside his brother, and looked at Aldrich, and then, pointedly, at his own broad ember back, and then at Aldrich again. Aldrich stared. "You want me to?" He barked a startled laugh. "You want me to ride you? Cinder, you're beastkin. You're a person. You're sacred. The elder folk would faint dead away. No one rides a—" Cinder's look did not change. Through the bond came a single dry pulse of meaning, warm and stubborn and final. "You have 5 fingers between 2 hands and 100 miles of snow to cross, and we are one thing, and one thing may carry itself. Get on, brother, before I change my mind and make you walk." And Aldrich, still laughing, wiping his eyes for the last time, gave up. Because there was no arguing with the Grimox who had made up his mind, and because the offer was so plainly not about the snow at all, but about the bond, the thing they had become, the wanting to carry and be carried. And he clambered awkwardly up onto the broad, warm back and settled between the great shoulders, and Cinder rose beneath him with an easy, mountainous strength, and it felt, absurdly, like coming home to a home Aldrich had never had. "Three Hearth, then," Aldrich said, one maimed hand fisted in the ember fur, the winter sun on his upturned face, the thick, strange quicken shimmering in the wood ahead, and the white peaks rising beyond. "And then Bleak Hollow, and then Lorcow, and whatever the world's becoming while we go. All of it. Together." Cinder rumbled and turned toward the high shoulder of the reaches and the road home, and broke into a long, ground-eating lope through the snow beneath the red pines. And the two of them went up into the winter wood together, bittersweet and unbroken and bound, toward the fate they had climbed out of the dark to meet. Far below the winter wood, below the wards and the deeps and the drowned, dreaming city, in the place that was not a place and the confinement outside of hours, the warden of the deep felt the threshold open to the surface, and the two small, striving souls pass up through it, and knew that his long patience had borne its fruit at last. He felt the warden's death first, the wall-breaker's fall, the shock of it running up through the whole layered weave of the deeps like the toll of a great bell. And then, riding that shock, the thing he had waited an age uncounted to feel. The stalled work coming unstuck, the great weaving that had sat frozen since before he could remember, the vast transformation of the world that his chains had permitted him to watch and never to touch, shuddering and turning and beginning, at long last, to move. A warden slain by an unvowed hand at the loom's own favored moment, the one knife that could cut the knot. And a boy the warden of the deep had marked and weighted and heaped with generous graces. A boy who had thought, gratifyingly, that every scrap of it was his own doing, had taken up that knife of his own fierce will and cut the world free. The warden of the deep was not a thing that smiled, precisely, but something moved in the vast, cold, ancient weight of him that was the kin of satisfaction. The deep, grim contentment of a craftsman who has labored at an impossible task across an unbearable span and seen it, against all likelihood, come right in his hands. "There," he said, into the silence of his prison, watching the great weaving turn and gather and begin its long-arrested work. "There, at the last. Well struck, little maker. Well struck, and never once suspecting whose scale you tipped." Something that was almost tenderness threaded the ancient voice. "You think you've climbed out of the dark and gone home to grieve your father and hunt your enemies and warn your people. And so you have. But you have done a far larger thing than any of those, and you will never know it was the thing you were made to do. And that is the kindness I could give you, and the cruelty. And I could not have chosen otherwise if I wished. For the work was moving now, and it would not stop. The quicken was rising into the surface world. The boy had felt it already, felt it and feared it rightly. And it would go on rising, and the long, slow turning of the reaches into something wilder and vaster, and more terrible than any surface folk had dreamed, would go on turning, and could no more be halted now than a struck avalanche. The great weaving had begun. The ordinary beasts would grow strange and mighty. The thin, quiet world above would ripen toward the wildness of the deeps. There would be wonders in it, and there would be horrors, and there would be a price paid in the years to come by every soul living under that changing sky. And the boy who had loosed it would stand in the front of that price, all unknowing, a runewright of the blade, with a grimox at his side, and a father to find, and a house to answer, and now a whole transforming world to meet. The warden of the deep had done the one thing his chains had left him room to do. He had found a soul already falling in the right direction, and given it, gently, a reason to fall faster. And it had carried him and his stalled work, and the whole slow fate of the world, down with it, into motion. He was still bound. That had not changed, and perhaps would never change. The crueler power that had chained him had made no promises, and the freeing of the work was not the freeing of the watcher. He would hang here yet, out of time, and watch what he had set moving move. But he had done it. After an age of frozen helplessness, he had reached, by the one hair's breadth of liberty left him, and touched the world, and turned it. "Strive, little maker," the warden of the deep said once more, softly, watching the boy and the beast lope up through the snow toward the peaks, toward Three Hearth and Bleak Hollow and Lorcaw, and everything the changing world would set in their road. "You have done the great thing, and there are only smaller things left to you now. Only a father's fate and a family's warning and an enemy's reckoning, and the whole wild becoming of the world you were born to. Only that. Go and meet it. I'll be watching, as I have always watched. And when the price of what you've loosed comes due, and it will come due, remember that you chose the hard, whole road over the easy half one every time it was offered, and never once regretted it." Something ancient and almost weary settled over the bound watcher as the two small figures dwindled up into the winter wood and were gone. It is why I chose you. It is why the work is moving. And it is why, of all the doomed and striving souls I have watched fall into my dark, you are the one I would have wished to tell the truth, if I could have told it to anyone at all. He could not, so he only watched and waited, and let the great weaving turn, while far above him a maimed young maker rode an awakened Grimox up, through the snow beneath the red pines, toward the peaks, toward the future, toward the whole vast, changing world that neither of them yet understood they had remade. And the winter sun stood pale and low over the hollow reaches, and the wind moved in the boughs, and the quicken rose, and everything that had been about to happen began, at last, to happen.